Order, order. We now come to the opposition day, unallotted half-day. Mr Elvin Hewitt. Mr Angus Robertson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to move this debate, and the words which stand in my name and those of my right honourable and honourable friends in the Scottish National Party and Plaid Cymru, the Party of Wales. The case for the dissolution of the House of Commons is, I believe, urgent, it's compelling, and it is of greater importance than any party political interest. It's clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the public believes that this Parliament is without legitimacy, it's without credibility, and it's without trust. The expenses scandal is the most recent and grave cause of this public concern, but there are other causes which have undermined faith in the political process, including the decision taking us into an illegal and immoral war in Iraq based on a lie. We in the SNP and Plaid Cymru believe that it is only by demonstrating our trust in the people through an immediate general election that we can begin to rebuild trust in parliamentary democracy. And for those who doubt the seriousness of the situation, I think we need to ask ourselves this: how has it come to pass that fascists and neo-Nazis have been elected in the UK? I am certain that the good people of the northwest of England, of Yorkshire and the Humber, are as horrified as the rest of us that Holocaust deniers and anti-Semites now hold elected office. Madam Deputy Speaker, this aberration is a byproduct of the crushing lack of credibility that affects the established UK political system at the present time. Now, while, of course, welcoming the ministers responding to the debate and congratulating them on their continuing and new responsibilities, it is noted in sorrow that the Prime Minister has chosen yet again not to be here. Because, of course, we hear a lot from the bunker at number 10 Downing Street about the need to reconnect with Parliament. But when it comes to actual debates about whether the people should be trusted, the Prime Minister is not here. In contrast, we are making the case for a rebuilding of trust, and we are happy. We, on this side, are happy to let the people decide. Of course, it goes without saying that we in the SNP and Plaid Cymru, we wish the governance of our countries to occur from our national capitals and not the Palace of Westminster. Although I am certain that we will secure further self-government shortly, this House of Commons will still play a role, in the short term at least, making laws over Scotland and Wales. And so long as this is the case, then we will demand the highest democratic standards in this place, as I'm sure members do on all sides of the House. I'm happy to give way to the honourable gentleman.
Thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. And on that very point he has mentioned, obviously the SNP administration has been in Holyrood now for just over 2 years. The fact is that this House has passed more legislation. This House has passed more legislation in that 2 years for the people of Scotland than the SNP administration in Holyrood.
The honourable gentleman makes his point about what is a very, very successful and popular SNP government in Scotland, but rather than get involved in a political partisan ding-dong on these issues, I would ask him and his honourable friends to listen to the argument I'm going to make, which is about the credibility of this House as a whole. It's not about the government, in my view. It's not involving the government. It's not involving the Prime Minister, the case I'm going to make, and perhaps the Secretary of State for Scotland would like to listen to that rather than chuntering from a sedentary position. Yes, indeed.
Well, he makes the point that the Prime Minister isn't here, and he talks about the credibility of this House, which is the very root of his motion, which I totally support and congratulate him on. Would he also note that the Tory benches, for instance, are pretty empty now? Perhaps that's because so many MPs have second jobs. Perhaps if there was a dissolution of the House, there would be an election, and at that election the candidates should declare what proportion of their time and what proportion of their earnings will actually come from this place rather than second jobs.
Well, The honourable gentleman has made its point. It's on the record, but I want to return to the point that I want to make. That I think that at this stage, we want to be clear that this is a motion affecting the whole House, every party, independents as well. It is not a motion of no confidence in the Prime Minister or the Government, and that's the reason I appeal to members on all sides to support it. And the evidence supporting the case for a general election is compelling, and the feedback that we've all been hearing around the country on the doorsteps in the last few weeks has been overwhelming. This has been borne out in a series of recent independent surveys. In The Guardian, on the 22nd of May, in a poll conducted by the ICM polling organisation, it showed that 2/3 of voters now say that the Prime Minister should call a general election before the end of the year. More than half of the voters believe the Prime Minister should go to the country before the process of constitutional change can begin. And only 30% said the election should be delayed until 2010. It's not just ICM, not just in The Guardian. Politics Home, they conducted a poll on the 20th of May, showed that the 70% of respondents want an election immediately or within a few short months. Populous showed something similar for ITV. YouGov for the Daily Telegraph showed something similar at the end of May. YouGov Channel 4 showed that 63% of respondents do not trust much or trust at all members of this House of Commons. And then most damning of all, indeed, I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Would you agree with me that Labour members, who earlier this week wanted their own election for the Prime Minister, should extend that courtesy to the rest of the country? And if they want an election in the Labour Party, they should make sure that the voters of the UK also have an election.
Well, again, my honourable friend has made an additional reason why there should be a general election, and I think many people in the country would agree with the view, indeed many members of the governing party on Labour benches agree. Perhaps this is one of the honourable gentlemen seeking to intervene now.
Thank you very much for giving way. Thank the honourable member for giving way. No, the SNP have form on this type of activity. In 1979, when you brought down a Labour government, we had a Conservative government.
Could I just remind the honourable gentleman of using the correct parliamentary term?
Yeah, the honourable member's party brought down a Labour government, which resulted in the Conservatives being in power for 18 years. Was that a good thing or a bad thing for the people of Scotland and Wales, let alone England?
I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman's history lesson. I was, of course, in primary 8 at that time, it is true. It is true. But I've already made the point. The honourable
Order. Angus Robinson.
The honourable gentleman has clearly missed the point that I've been trying to make, which is that this is a motion for the dissolution of the House of Commons. It is not a motion of no confidence in the government or in the Prime Minister. And on that basis, I return to the point that I want to make. Sorry, I should have said primary 7 rather than primary 8, of course. Returning to the issue of the public's view on whether there should be a general election or not. The BBC commissioned a poll by Ipsos Mori at the end of May. 48% of the respondents said they believed that half or more MPs are corrupt. Asked whether they trusted MPs to tell the truth, 76% said that they did not trust MPs, and only 20% said they did trust them. The public tend to be more positive towards their local MP than towards MPs in general, which will be a relief for many of us. That was the finding in the BBC survey. But 85% of those surveyed want an independent judicial body to scrutinise MPs' affairs. I'd be glad to give way.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, and also for clarifying the point that rather confused us about primary 8. Many of us rather suspected he'd been held back for a year. But on the point about listening to statistical evidence on the doorstep, the logic of what he says is that people should vote for people as long as they're not MPs. And if 2/3 of the country wanted to see a massive change, why did 2/3 of the country sit on their hands last Thursday?
There are many reasons why people voted for all kinds of things. But what I've pointed out just now is that overwhelmingly on the case of whether there should be a dissolution of Parliament, majority public opinion is in favour of that happening, and that is one of the important reasons why I think we should vote for the motion before us today. I will, yeah.
The honourable gentleman makes a very interesting point about the difference between how MPs are viewed locally versus how the corporate body of politics is viewed nationally. Would he agree with me that while individual members of Parliament have earned their credibility and support in local communities by working there, the great malaise which he's referring to is because corporately there's been a fracture in the trust relationship between the people who elect us to this body and us as a corporate group. Does he not feel also that it's very important we have a transparent discussion about constitutional change, some of which was alluded to by the Prime Minister of the UK, not the Prime Minister of Scotland, who indeed is here, but we actually have a collective responsibility beyond what he even says to try and make sure that we win that trust, and that's going to take a lot of effort.
The honourable gentleman's absolutely right, and it's a point that I will come back to shortly, because there is a job of work to be done on that important issue too. In returning to the BBC survey on what public opinion is on this important question, 62% of respondents said that they believe that MPs put self-interest ahead of the country and their constituents. Only 1 in 5, 20% of the public, are satisfied with the way that the Westminster Parliament is doing its job. These figures are damning. And if we do not grasp the thorny nettle and deal with this issue, we are going to have a huge problem. And of course, the large recent expenses scandal, which is the biggest single recent reason why this crisis of confidence has come to pass, is one that we should put a lot of attention into getting sorted, but it comes after years of prevarication and resistance to openness and transparency in the House of Commons, and the Daily Telegraph revelations exposed a state of affairs which has been totally unacceptable. The public is right to be angry, very angry, with the flipping of properties, with the avoidance of capital gains tax, with claims for phantom mortgages, and they quite rightly ask, how is it that there appears to be one rule for the public and another for MPs who have been caught out? They also say, how can a tainted Parliament with tainted members find the trusted, credible solution to the crisis? Of course, I want to make some more progress, but I'll come back to the Honourable Lady. Of course, it has been right to take radical, immediate surgery. That has happened in a number of individual cases, and it has been approached by the different political parties who have finally grasped the nettle of transparency. At the recent meeting of party leaders called by Mr. Speaker, I pointed out after this particular point, which is important. At the recent meeting of party leaders called by Mr. Speaker, I pointed out that our parties have already committed to a higher standard of transparency, namely that used in the Scottish Parliament. The Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Liberal Democrats, the SNP and others agreed years ago at Holyrood to this better system. And I suggested to the Prime Minister, to the Leader of the Opposition, the Liberal Democrats and others, that we should simply emulate that system. I will in a moment. They agreed, and we are now on the right path, with the plans that Parliament should publish our claims on a regular basis. In the meantime, many MPs, myself included, have proactively put our details up for public access on our own websites. I give way to the Honourable Member for Stirling.
I'm listening with great interest to the honourable gentleman, and one would think that he and his colleagues somehow were a race apart in some of the difficulties that are facing us in this House in terms of expenses. And I wonder whether or not, as well as taking the credit for putting his details on his website, he would also accept some of the responsibility for the situation that we all face as parliamentarians. And secondly, will he also advise this House that the Scottish Parliament had to go through its own trauma on expenses before it got to the situation that it's in now, and that was dealt with under a Labour and Liberal-led administration?
The Honourable Lady is right to suggest that under Presiding Officer George Reid, the Scottish Parliament reformed the processes that were used, and all political parties were involved in that process, and that was welcome then, and it is welcome now that the lessons have been learned. The record will show, the Honourable Lady, that I have not held any party to be better or worse in this debate or any other. If the Honourable Lady has any evidence to the contrary, she can present it at any stage. I return to the issue of transparency. It has been the right thing to do, as well as agree to a series of other measures, including the ending of flipping of second homes and the independent scrutiny of all second home claims by MPs on all sides. It is in the public interest and the interests of many hard-working and honest parliamentarians on all sides of the House that this process is accelerated. It is right that we put great store in the Kelly Commission, which will give independent recommendations later this year to structural changes in allowances and expenses. It's also right that all party leaders have accepted the principle of an external parliamentary standards authority, and this means that regardless of which party is in office, we have a guarantee that the system overseeing MPs' and peers' conduct, including allowances and complaints, will be delegated from Parliament. This is a good thing. It is a huge step forward. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Hang on, gentleman. When he says regardless of which party, could he tell us his valued opinion? If there was a general election called this week, which party does he think would win that election, Labour or the Tories?
Who do you think?
I think it's up to the public to decide. I think it is up to the public to decide, and I think the honourable gentleman should be confident that all good MPs have an excellent chance of being re-elected. So no doubt he has nothing to fear of an early general election. I want to make some progress now. I've been generous to all sides of the House. The agreements between all of the political parties and the tangible progress also completely undermines the case against a general election. After all, the Kelly Commission reports, I've said I'm going to make some progress, so I will. After all, the Kelly Commission reports in the autumn, the Parliamentary Standards Authority proposal is still in the discussion stage, and all parties are signed up to these structural improvements. There is no reason why we can't have an election. It will not delay a thing. We should embrace the opportunity of a historic reformist election, not the poor second of yet another presentational relaunch of a tired government. Imagine a general election campaign based around the various ideas for democratic reform, the ideas of the Prime Minister, for example, and of others, galvanising public interest and support, if that is what indeed they are. We in the SNP and Plaid Cymru would of course argue for decision-making closer to home, but we would also make the case for wholesale Westminster reform. Electoral reform. Imagine a parliament properly reflecting the views of the people, of course with the necessary safeguards of a minimum electoral hurdle. How about a fully democratic parliament, ending the grotesque farce of a second chamber in the self-styled mother of all parliaments without any democratic mandate whatsoever? How about fixed-term parliaments, ending the whip hand of the executive over the democratic process? What about strengthening Parliament with stronger committees, the proper scrutiny of legislation and less curtailment of detailed oversight, ending in the travesty of undebated amendments? And how about a proper constitution? All of these, I think, are exciting ideas. Some of them are supported on all sides of the House. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way? He's most gracious. Can I assume then, from what he has just said, that he will be supporting the Prime Minister in his plans to reorganise Parliament and to give more to the ordinary people? And it will be nice to see him, because the problem we have with him, and he knows that, is that he's always seemed to be voting with the Conservatives and never with any other party.
Well, it's a good point at this stage to put on record that half the way through this debate I'm going to have to leave to meet with the Secretary for Justice on the Parliamentary Standards Authority, because there is all-party involvement in moving these things forward. So returning to the motion before us, no doubt some or most of these proposals would find support from other parties. Whichever party wins can then take them forward. The reform process will then have a mandate. The second argument I've been hearing in opposition to a democratic election is that because of the economic crisis, somehow we can't let the public decide. Well, if that's the case, how is it that the world's largest democracy, India, has managed a general election within recent months? How is it that the world's biggest economy, the United States, managed through an economic crisis with the historic election of Barack Obama, and the country with the closest parliamentary system to the United Kingdom, that of Canada, has managed similarly a general election in the middle of testing economic times. The list goes on and on. The argument against having a general election and testing economic times is just not credible. It is true, however, to say that we do also need an election to rebuild confidence in UK economic policy. Not only has this government taken no responsibility for their role in our economic difficulties, they are overseeing a catastrophic rise in unemployment. Over 200,000 people being thrown on the dole in the last 3 months, and a forecast balance of payments deficit of £93 billion and a national debt expected to reach £1.6 trillion. I will gladly give way to the honourable gentleman.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very, very grateful. The honourable gentleman is well liked in the House and he's showing his customary charm and that. But can I just say, firstly, the United States and India have fixed-term parliaments, so there's not a direct read across. But secondly, at the risk of sounding like perhaps rather an over-anxious primary H child, can I say that the mother of all parliaments, an expression when first used in this very chamber by John Bright, referred specifically to England, not to the power. That may not sit comfortably with the honourable gentleman, but it is accurate.
Very grateful for the history lesson. We will be glad to return this chamber to the good people of England, so it is their parliament, while we make better decisions at home in Scotland. I see his colleague from the Social Democratic and Labour Party, which no doubt would also like to see a united Ireland making decisions for itself and not having Northern Irish members in this chamber. But that's a matter for the people of Northern Ireland to decide. I've already given way to the honourable gentleman. I want to allow other members of the House to take part in this important debate. Returning to the economic challenges that we have at the present time, it is also of immense concern that we have a debt now under Labour of over £60,000 for every household in the UK. I remember election leaflets being put around. Was it in the 99 election campaign? Don't vote SNP, it'll cost every family £5,000. My goodness, how much more expensive it has been. Oh, 2007, it was as recent as that. It's now £60,000 price tag for Labour's mismanagement of our economy. We have, of course, a government, a Prime Minister, a Chancellor, who dithered and delayed over Northern Rock, taking 5 months from the start of the run to eventually nationalising the bank. A government which delayed, I've already signalled to the other side, honourable gentleman, I want to make progress to allow other members to get in. If he wants to make a speech, no doubt he will stand up and find the Deputy Speaker's eye. They took 5 months from the start of the run to eventually nationalising the bank. It is a government which delayed when the banking crisis started, refusing to guarantee sterling deposits across the banking system, and a government which took a year to get a Banking Act on the statute book, but which has not even yet brought forward changes to the banking regulations which led to many of the problems in the first place. And we have a government which failed to understand the impact on the poorest when they abolished the 10p rate of tax, who failed to act to temper the rise of fuel prices, and whose VAT cut protected less than half the jobs that direct capital investment would have. That last point is vital. While the Prime Minister talks the talk of fiscal stimulus, he has failed to walk the walk. While President Obama is delivering a real fiscal stimulus, in a state like Maryland, same size as Scotland, larger than Wales, they will have a £2 billion extra in resources to spend in 2010. This government is planning to cut £1 billion from the Scottish budget, cutting £1 billion from public spending in Scotland, directly threatening 9,000 jobs. In truth, Madam...
We conduct this debate in an orderly manner, please. Mr Angus Robertson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. In truth, the government's case against an election has nothing to do with the need to pursue parliamentary reform or to manage the economy. It is pure, naked self-preservation in the wake of the worst electoral showing by the Labour Party in 90 years. Labour MPs have been told by the government whips that a vote for this motion or an abstention means the end of their careers. This is perhaps understandable for many in Scotland, where the SNP, a mid-term party of government, went up 10 points, while in contrast the Labour Party slumped and the Tories, Lib Dems and the UK Irrelevance Party went down. The SNP won the seat of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Labour came third in the seat of the Secretary of State for Scotland, and the SNP won 2/3 of all local authority areas of the country, including Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Dundee, Stirling, North Ayrshire, South Lanarkshire. The list goes on. Perhaps the noble Lord Mandelson has been right in backing the Prime Minister. After all, the latest polls show that it doesn't matter who is in charge of the Labour Party. Today's Comres poll shows that in Scotland the SNP would win an election against Labour regardless of who is in charge. But these partisan considerations should, and they are, these partisan considerations should come second in the context of a profound crisis in democracy, where we should all put trust in democracy ahead of our own party interests, which is why I wish to conclude with some words of cross-party consensus from another member of the House from the opposite side about the need to restore trust in politics. He said earlier today, "In the midst of all the rancour and recriminations, let us seize the moment to lift our politics to a higher standard. In the midst of doubt, let us revive confidence. Let us stand together, because on this at least I think we all agree that Britain deserves a political system equal to the hopes and character of our people. Let us differ on policy, that is inevitable, but let us stand together for integrity and democracy. That is more essential than ever." Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, those fine words by the Prime Minister earlier today were correct, but they lacked the delivery mechanism, which is to hold a general election. That is why we must dissolve the House of Commons, hold a general election, and I commend the motion to the House.
The question is, as on the order paper. Mr Secretary Peter Hain.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the honourable member for Murray for praising the Prime Minister? We can do a lot more of that in this debate. And can I thank also the leader of Plaid Cymru for his earlier welcome to my reinstatement as Secretary of State. I'm very grateful, and apologise to the right honourable gentleman for having to rush off after I've spoken to get my seals of office, and apologise to the House as well. I have to stand him up for the Queen. I will respond to the honourable member for Murray in a moment and urge the House to reject this motion which calls for dissolution of Parliament. The question I want to ask first, Madam Deputy Speaker, is why is it not in the name of the Leader of the Opposition? He calls for an immediate general election every time he gets out of bed and every time he goes on television. In fact, he's said virtually nothing else for the past few weeks except to demand an early election. So why doesn't he table the motion himself instead of trooping dutifully in behind the nationalists? I will in a moment. Or is he just playing to the media gallery as usual, because he knows this House of Commons will not back him? Bravery before the cameras, cowardice before Parliament. Instead, he's allowing the nationalists to do his...
Order. The honourable member would perhaps withdraw that remark and reconsider.
So it was said in jest, Madam Deputy Speaker. Instead, the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Conservative, is allowing the nationalists to do his work for him.
Maybe the Leader of the Opposition has taken an example from the Prime Minister, who's done the same thing. Here is a debate where the Prime Minister could come and explain why he didn't want an election, and yet he's not bothered to turn up. He sent a minister who isn't actually available for the debate. We have a 3-hour debate before the House. The least the government could do is find a minister who can be here for the debate.
Well, where is the leader of the Liberal Democrats? Where is the leader of the Conservative Party? Where is the leader of the... I see, the leader of the SNP's come dutifully down to do the Tories' work for them, as he so often does. Madam Deputy Speaker, Plaid Cymru and the SNP, the Tories' little helpers. Just as in 1979, when the SNP voted to destroy a Labour government and usher in 18 years of miserable Tory rule. Madam Deputy Speaker, just as in the European elections too, voting Plaid Cymru allowed the Tories to top the poll in Wales, albeit on a pitiful vote just over 6% of the electorate. Voting SNP will also allow the Tories to get in at Westminster.
Not that it matters a great deal, but just to get it accurate, the honourable gentleman has apologised once in a few seconds to the House. He said that Plaid Cymru voted to bring down the Labour government. We didn't.
Actually, I didn't say that at all, but I'll come to him in a moment. I didn't say that at all. I said, and I quote directly, that that the SNP voted with the Tories to bring down the government in 1979. But I will remind him and remind the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we remember very well that Plaid Cymru came to the rescue of the besieged Conservative government under John Major by doing a grubby deal in 1993. The SNP...
Talking about grubby deals, does the right honourable member remember that in 1979 the Labour government did a grubby deal with Plaid Cymru to secure their votes to try and cling to office?
Actually, it was an honourable deal concerning, I think, quarrymen in North Wales, as I recall, and that was in their interests, and we were happy to do it. But the SNP have a history of seeking to inflict a Tory government on Scotland. In a moment. They did it in 1979. His party did it in 1979, and they're trying to do it again now. Their real agenda is not about an election. It's about wanting to get a Tory government in Britain to undermine Scotland's link with the rest of Britain. They'd love to have a Tory government in Westminster, inflicting mass unemployment, education cuts, and hospital closures in Scotland again, so they could try to ride a wave of revulsion into independence for Scotland.
Say for giving way. And can I agree with them? The last thing that Scotland needs is a Conservative government. We remember all too well the Scotch-served policies, the testing ground for the poll tax. But doesn't he agree with me? The reason that we will get a Conservative government in Scotland is because of the failure and futility of his Labour government.
That's totally failed. Yes. Is he then saying that he prefers a Labour government?
Come on.
All right. Well, that's very interesting. So, as far as he's concerned, he doesn't mind a Conservative government in Westminster. I'll just make a bit of progress. Now that we have him on the record as being indifferent to a Tory government, then that's, the people of Scotland will note that. Madam Deputy Speaker, people who back the Nationalists get the Tories on their coattails, just as the Tories are on their coattails in voting for this motion. That's what the Nationalists are. Tartan Tories in Scotland, daffodil Tories in Westminster. Mr. Speaker, to dissolve a daffodil Tory in Westminster, certainly.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. I think we need to respect history here. The reason why we had Tory governments throughout the 80s and 90s was not because of the actions of these parties, but because the Labour government lost the election and lost and lost and lost. It is their responsibility, not ours.
But I just say to the honourable member for Carnarvon, for whom I have a lot of respect, it was his nationalist colleagues in Scotland that helped bring down the Labour government that paved the way for a Tory government.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I agree with his comments about what happened in 1979, and the people of Scotland obviously have good memories, and they will never forgive the separatists of the SNP for what happened in 1979. It was an unmitigated disaster for the people of Scotland. I'm sure the Minister will be aware that following that in 1979, the SNP, the separatists, were dubbed the Tartan Tories by the people of Scotland. Is he also aware that, given that the official opposition are totally devoid of any policies at the moment, that the separatists of the SNP currently are dubbed by the people of Scotland the political wing of the Conservative and Unionist Party?
Well, I think my honourable friends put the case very eloquently, and I have to agree with him. And here the Tartan Tories are at it again. Siding with the Conservatives to achieve their objectives. People who back the Nationalists get the Tories on their coattails, as I said. Madam Deputy Speaker, to dissolve Parliament now would be to walk away from, I will in a moment, to dissolve... Well, I'll happily give way in that case.
How does the Secretary of State have the gall to accuse our parties of being Tories when on virtually any major issue of the last 12 years, our parties have been to the left of his, whether it's the Iraq War, whether it's the Iraq War, or it's privatisation of the Royal Mail.
What about the minimum...
Order. Members have a right to be heard. Secretary Peter Hain.
What about the statutory minimum wage? I don't remember massive support there at all from nationalists. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, my point is this. To dissolve Parliament now would be to walk away from the necessity for reform that voters are demanding, as the Honourable Member for Moray said, quite rightly, and that we are delivering in the form set out by the Prime Minister earlier today. And I heard the Honourable Member for Moray waxing lyrical and actually very persuasively about the need for democratic reform. Virtually every one of the proposals he advocated were enunciated from this dispatch box by the Prime Minister a few hours ago. To dissolve Parliament now would be to turn our backs on the British people in their time of economic need and insecurity. Neither of these two great challenges, the political challenge and the economic challenge, would be solved by an election. Playing with parliamentary motions may be a priority for opposition parties. Cleaning up politics and getting the country back to work is Labour's priority. The British people...
Does the Secretary of State for Wales not believe that a Labour victory in a general election would clearly reinforce the strength and competence of the government in addressing the issues that confront this nation now? And is that not the case for having an election?
When the time comes to call an election, indeed, we will get a renewed mandate to take the country forward to meet the challenges of the future, and that will be the choice before the British people at that point. The British people, however, would, I believe, not forgive us for abandoning the job of parliamentary reform and economic recovery now. They want the government to sort things out, and they want them to do it quickly, want us to do it quickly, and then, and only then, to call a general election. There will be one, soon enough, within a year. Only then will it be right to go to the country and ask, who takes us forward to the future now that we've addressed these pressing concerns of today?
Done quickly, I agree entirely. Why, after 12 years, have we not yet got a fully elected House of Lords and a proper democratic system for this chamber? This is expediency by government. This isn't taking decisive action. This argument is facile beyond belief.
But the reason that we haven't been able to get our reform through the House of Lords is the House of Lords blocked it. We only have around 30%. We only have around 30% of the votes for Labour in the House of Lords, and the Conservative Party, despite advocating now the policy of an elected second chamber, cannot deliver their own peers in the House of Lords. But sooner rather than later, we will put the question to them, and we will hope to carry the House with us in getting full reform for a democratic second chamber. Meanwhile, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a lot to do. And of course, the European elections were terrible for the Labour Party. But far more significant, the European elections were an alarm call for all parties, all of us here, and for parliamentary democracy itself. Low turnout at elections for every party, low turnout at elections is the clearest sign that the British people are not engaged with the political process. That is our fault and not theirs. We seem obsessed with procedure and tribal party politics, as we are this afternoon. And now the public also think MPs are all in this for our own ends. But if this motion is carried and Parliament is dissolved, all the poll will amount to is a referendum on MPs' expenses. Another referendum on MPs' expenses. Low turnout and rising support for fringe and extreme parties show us one thing. The people used their vote last Thursday to protest not on the finer points of European policy, but on the story of the day, indeed the story of every single one of the past 30 days, MPs' expenses.
I thank the right honourable friend for giving way. And on that point where the member whose debate this is didn't give way, can I just ask him a simple question? Does he honestly believe that if there is a general election in the coming weeks, if this motion were to be successful, does he honestly believe that the question of members' expenses will go away? Will it not be something that will then continue for the following 4 years as well, for the Daily Telegraph and all the other newspapers to once again revisit the issue and find some other reason for printing the same thing?
I couldn't agree more, and that is why we need to lance the boil now. And that is why we need this Parliament, on a cross-party basis, to sort this out here and now, and then within a year to have on the decision for who should take the country forward, not how we should reform parliamentary expenses, because we'd have done that, but who to take the country forward to meet the big challenges of a global economic crisis, of climate change and all the other issues before us. I give way to the honourable member.
Grateful to the right honourable member. Would he agree with me, therefore, in summary to his argument, that in effect what's happened is the general public and indeed the media have become obsessed with the process of politics rather than the outcomes which we're meant to create, and part of that is our own fault. The people of Montgomeryshire are less interested in process than getting out of this recession, and therefore could he maybe explain how he envisages the government, if he isn't going to have an election in the months ahead, responding to the need of Montgomeryshire citizens and across the country for outcomes which make their lives better, which makes their jobs more secure, and reduce the sort of social tensions which led to the reaction which he described in the European elections last week.
I couldn't agree more with the honourable member that the media are far too obsessed, almost to the exclusion of all else, with process. Process, 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 rather than substance, substance, substance. And that is why we will carry on with delivering our policies to get the housing market going again, to build more social housing, to tackle the problems of business, lack of confidence, and to make sure that business is supported so that we can then get into a position to recover from this economic crisis brought upon by the global financial collapse and move the country forward. And then there will be a choice at the next general election, a very clear choice indeed. Madam Deputy Speaker, we do not need a referendum on expenses because we've just had one. We were all given a real kicking by the voters, and we understand the message. Clean up, shape up, get on with the business of government and come back to us when the problem is fixed. Where the opposition's party's posture, we deliver. We're determined to take the necessary action, not to walk away. And just imagine what might happen to the economy if we dissolved into an election. In the middle of probably the worst financial crisis the world has faced in living memory, Britain would face weeks and weeks of instability and uncertainty, just when there are reports of rising consumer confidence, just when business surveys show the pace of decline is slowing, just when mortgage approvals have risen for the third month in a row, just when the poison infecting our banks has been stemmed. Why, just at this critical moment, when the global economy is still very volatile, why do the nationalists want to trigger instability in the markets and in the British economy? Imagine for a moment pursuing this nationalist Tory alternative. We dissolve Parliament. Then we spend the next 3 weeks fighting each other, not fighting the global crisis. And the nationalists haven't a clue what to do about the crisis. The member for Carmarthen East and Duneva, who rather fancies himself as an economist, praised Iceland as an inspirational model. No sooner had he done this than its economy imploded. And his other small country model, Ireland, has sadly had its own serious difficulties. Yet they lauded both, that's to say, Plaid lauded both Iceland and Ireland as an ark of prosperity. As for the Tories, the real reason they want an election now is they cannot go on forever dodging the questions. They've got no policies at all except for multi-billion cuts in public investment. I will in a moment. And it's good to see the Right Honourable Member for Richmond has found time from his millionaire speaking and consultancy contracts to be with us today. He has a vivacious Welsh wife, but sadly she's not managed to educate him politically. He opposed the minimum wage, which has benefited millions of workers throughout Britain. He opposed the social chapter, referring, and I quote, to minimum wages, social chapters and all the other job-destroying nonsense. He said that the National Assembly for Wales, and I quote, would be nothing more than a talking shop and a terrible waste of money. Does he still hold these views? Shouldn't he now apologise to the Shadow Welsh Secretary for landing her right in it? And when he was Secretary of State for Wales, he at least learnt the national anthem. Indeed, I think rehearsing it led to him marrying his private secretary. But he blocked billions of pounds as Secretary of State of Objective 1 funding and convergence funding for Wales, and that a Labour government subsequently delivered. He's now part of an opposition that wants to implement billion-pound cuts that would decimate those very European programmes right across Wales.
I think the Secretary of State's speech is another good argument for having an early dissolution. He's obviously out of practice, may I say. But, I mean, if Plaid Cymru has nothing to contribute in terms of the economic crisis, why did his party actually agree to go into coalition with us? Why do we have the leader of my party as the economic minister coming up with the PRO-Act scheme for wage subsidy that he himself has praised as an innovative scheme which should be copied across the board?
If we're talking about politics and government in Cardiff Bay as opposed to politics and government in this House, why did his party chase after the Conservatives in desperate search of a coalition before Labour helped them out and got them into government? Why did his party do that? Madam Deputy Speaker, the Shadow Health Secretary let slip on the Today programme this morning, and I quote, that this does mean over 3 years after 2011 a 10% reduction in the departmental expenditure limits for other departments. It's a very tough spending requirement. Yet it is very tough, this demand from the Tories. 10% cuts would mean an utter disaster for housing, for policing, for business support, for defence, for many, many other public services right across the board. A 10% cut would be 50 billion across the United Kingdom, 600 million in Wales and 1.2 billion in Scotland. The Tory mask is slipping, and they want people to vote soon before the truth is out. They have no positive solutions for the financial crisis, just opportunist spin on the economy today, followed by savage cuts to public services tomorrow. Cuts done almost with relish, gleefully, using the financial crisis as an excuse to do what they've always wanted to do, to cut, cut and cut again.
Secretary of State is absolutely right. Savage cuts in the teeth of a recession are the wrong thing to do.
Yes.
He will therefore criticise his own Chancellor and the Treasury for the £500 million of the cuts heading to Scotland's way next year in the teeth of a recession.
But isn't this curious? Isn't this curious? Because the Scottish Government has never had more money than it does now. Its budget, for the Welsh Assembly Government, more than double what it was when we came into power in 1997. And what's the real nationalist agenda? Why would they dissolve this Parliament today? It would not just be for the purpose of an immediate election. They would dissolve this Parliament forever. If they were frank, there they are, they'd share the idea. If they were frank, they would admit that they'd break up the United Kingdom. Cutting off Wales and Scotland from the main markets, population centres, wealth and international influence of the United Kingdom. The Honourable Member, the Right Honourable Member, the Leader of the SNP, says he's talking sense at last. That is the sense that the people of Scotland will reject cutting Scotland off from the links with the United Kingdom, just as Plaid Cymru would cut Wales off from the great benefits of sheltering under the umbrella of the United Kingdom and making us all stronger together, of course.
Given that his colleagues in the Labour Party in Scotland have been deploying these arguments for years and deployed them, I'm sure, in the European election campaign, to what does he attribute the judgment of the people of Scotland to have the SNP vote up 10% in mid-term and the resounding endorsement of the SNP government in Scotland last week?
Well, he says resounding endorsement of the SNP government. I think they got less than a third of the vote on a tiny turnout. An absolutely tiny turnout. And Labour voters, for the reasons I've explained, stayed at home in their hundreds of thousands. Now, Madam Deputy, of course, yes.
Will my right honourable friend agree with me that people listening to this debate in the country will be absolutely appalled at the petty discussion about voting and who's got what percentage increases? What concerns the people of this country? and certainly the people of Wales. Madeleine Moon. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What concerns the people of Wales and the people of this country is the memories of being told to get on their bike and go and find work. Hunt the job. People sending money back to Westminster from Wales that could have been invested in Wales. Schools falling apart. Education waiting lists. That's what people want us discussing here, not whether another party has increased its voting turnout by 1%. Nobody cares about that. They care about their lives.
My honourable friend put it extremely persuasively. And it reminds me that the Right Honourable Member for Richmond, and he was Secretary of State for Wales, endorsed the policy of his predecessor, the Right Honourable Member for Wokingham, in sending money back from Wales to the Treasury, which we then had to reverse by more than doubling the budget for Wales since when we came into power. Madam Deputy Speaker, if they were successful, the Nationalists, in wrenching Wales and Scotland from the rest of the United Kingdom, that would leave Wales with a £9 billion deficit in public finances, and in Scotland the figure would be around £10 billion. The SNP administration in Holyrood is propped up by the Tories. Tory votes in the Scottish Parliament supported the SNP's budget of cuts, and the quid pro quo is the SNP in Westminster do the Tories' bidding. People in Scotland whose communities still bear the scars of Thatcherism did not thank the SNP in 1979 and won't do the same again now. Let me make this plain, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Tories and the Nationalists would turn their backs on the British people and walk away together. They would dissolve this Parliament because they hope it would suit their short-term political ends. Only Labour will stay the course to do the hard work and to reform and give real help to the British people. They can dissolve if they want to. This government is not for dissolving. We are standing firm, and I urge this House to reject the motion.
William Hay.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I begin by congratulating the Secretary of State for Wales. To hold that office is one of the greatest honours that life can bring, and to hold it twice is a piece of great good fortune. He said that I had somehow in the past landed the current Shadow Welsh Secretary in it in some way. I can assure him that the Conservatives, having won in Wales for the first time in 90 years, she doesn't feel very landed in it at the moment. And he should hope to be landed in it in a similar way in future elections. And so that was not a very appropriate way to describe it, nor to deride any other party for getting, as he said, about a third of the vote, when there was no region or nation of the United Kingdom in which his government received a third of the vote last week, only 2 in which it received a quarter of the vote, some in which they didn't get a fifth of the vote, and some in which they didn't get a tenth of the vote as the governing party of this country. But I congratulate the honourable member for Murray on moving the motion, one that it will be no surprise to discover that the official opposition can readily support. And the crux of the question here really is a simple one. By common consent across all parts of this House, our country faces enormous challenges with which in all parties we're familiar. The challenge of restoring the health of an economy battered by recession and debt levels, the ever-present challenge of improving public services, the challenge of reducing violent crime, of improving national security at a time of international terrorism, of restoring faith in our political system after scandals and revelations that have hit this House hard, and rebuilding respect and confidence in our democracy itself. And the question before us, Madam Deputy Speaker, is whether these tasks and challenges are best faced for the next 10 or 11 months by the current Parliament, now in its twilight year, with a large and growing number of honourable and right honourable members leaving its ranks, burdened with a serious loss of its reputation, with a minimal and diminishing opportunity to pass fresh legislation, with many decisions on hold and with a visibly divided government, or whether they are better faced by a new Parliament with new members and renewed energy, with the expectation of several years' work before it, with a mandate approved by the people of the country, and the authority that comes from demonstrable popular approval in a democracy, something which the current government has forfeited and which the government of the current Prime Minister has neither sought nor ever received. And one only has to ask the question, Madam Deputy Speaker, to see that to most people in this country there is a clear and emphatic answer. The Prime Minister's statement in this House earlier today was peppered with references to legitimacy, accountability, democracy and engagement, and yet it never seemed to occur to him that one way to bring about for any government legitimacy, authority, accountability and engagement is to consult the 44 million voters of this country and let them have their say themselves. He has been setting up a National Democratic Renewal Council, which turns out to be a cabinet committee behind closed doors, with a title so risible in its grandiose pomposity that it shows a complete lack of self-awareness about the ridicule in which the government is held in the nation. And yet how could we inject vigour and energy and freshness into political debate better than to consult the people of the country? And what is more, it is apparent, I'll give way in a moment, of course, what is more, it is apparent beyond argument that the majority of those people, who are genuinely no fans of holding elections unnecessarily, believe themselves that they now have the right to give their own verdict. Every survey shows it. Any time any of us walk down the street, we hear it. Some of them feel let down by their elected representatives and wish to have their say. Many can sense with the sure instinct of the British people that a crucial decision point is coming and that there is no reason to delay. And perhaps even more have been watching a bitter battle take place within the governing party as to whether one unelected Prime Minister should be replaced with another one, and it's not surprising that they should feel that the question of who leads our country is not the private preserve of a dysfunctional government at the tail end of a parliament, but a matter for the collective judgment of the nation as a whole. I give way to the honourable member.
I'm very grateful, and the right honourable gentleman is a very considerable historian. So could he tell us just one historical occasion on which a government with a secure majority has called a general election simply because the opposition has asked for one?
There are many cases in history, Madam Deputy Speaker, where governments have called a general election because they wish to seek a mandate for whatever policies they were putting to the country long before the expiry of a parliament. And we can refer him to Baldwin in 1923, before the honourable member for Rhondda says it was not a Tory government, and indeed so many of the governments in the 1950s and indeed in the 1980s that sought re-election before the end of a parliament. And on some of those occasions, the opposition were asking for one, certainly in 1923. And so I hope if he has any further historical inquiries, he will bring them up during the rest of my speech. Now, while the question of a dissolution of Parliament cannot simply be settled by reference to public demand, it has to be accepted by any commentator or participant in our politics that the current circumstances of this Parliament, already in its final year, are without precedent in modern times. Not only is public faith in this House at its lowest possibly at any time since the late 18th century, the male franking scandal of the late 18th century, if the honourable member wants a historical reference, but public support for the government of the day is, by reference to any of the widespread elections held within the last week, the lowest by some distance for any incumbent government at any point in our modern democratic history. And such a combination means that this Parliament lacks the authority to embark on new and substantial programmes of policy or reform, even if it had time and even if it had in its government the energy, the purpose or the vision. Now, vision, of course, was the crucial ingredient promised by the Prime Minister when he suddenly called off the general election planned in the autumn of 2007. He said that he would not have an election so that he could set out his vision. And he then, curiously, forgot to set out his vision. And indeed, the honourable member for Northampton North, a former minister, has put the Labour member has put this herself. The vision, she said, has not materialised in her letter last week. People look to their Prime Minister to the government for high-quality public services and a sense of purpose and direction for the country. The Prime Minister has to articulate that, and sadly, it hasn't happened. That is what they think actually on the government side of the House of Commons. But then the reason not to have an election was to set out a vision. Now, the reason, memorably given by the Prime Minister in his interview a month ago on GMTV, is that an election would cause chaos. Now, this revealing insight into the bunker-like mentality of 10 Downing Street is in itself a further argument for the people of this country to have their say. The Prime Minister feared chaos at the ballot box, presumably in place of the well-ordered conduct of government which we have been able to witness in recent weeks. The Home Secretary resigned on Tuesday, the Community Secretary on Wednesday, the Work and Pensions Secretary on Thursday. The Downing Street worked for 48 hours through the night to save the Prime Minister from being overthrown by his own cabinet. What a relief there was no chaos in the last couple of weeks in this country. And the argument against holding an election on the grounds of chaos, it possesses three shattering weaknesses. One is that it can be used, presumably, at any time, and could be used to justify never asking the people to go to the polls at any time for fear of the chaotic consequences they may haplessly bring down upon themselves. It is an argument of which Ceausescu would have been proud as he pathetically waved from the balcony at the tens of thousands who had come to remove him. Second, it shows a patronising misreading of the people of this country, who have never in recent times produced chaotic scenes in a general election and seldom produced a chaotic result, and who, the Prime Minister can rest assured, will go about their democratic duty when they do get the chance without any trace of chaos, but with a quiet and determined efficiency. Third, it is a comment that says little for those countries that have recently had a full-scale general election, even in the midst of a world economic recession. The honourable member for Ealing pointed out earlier some of them have fixed-term parliaments, but they still managed to conduct their elections in the middle of that recession. They include among their number no less than India, the world's largest and most complex democracy, where a respected government won the authority and increased freedom of manoeuvre that came from a renewal of its mandate. And the other, the United States of America, the world's most powerful democracy, in which elections produced a renewal and reinvigoration of national leadership on an utterly historic scale. So the people of India and of America managed to have their elections in a perfectly orderly way, and after campaigns that were far longer than a general election campaign in this country, but the Prime Minister believes that an election in this country, from which those countries derive so much of their proud democratic traditions, would be impossibly chaotic. What does that say about his view of Britain and the British people? It is yet further proof that he is incapable of trusting the people of Britain. Now, to be fair to the Secretary of State who spoke for the government, his loyalty to the Prime Minister does not extend to adopting the nonsensical arguments against an election employed by the Prime Minister himself. The gist of his argument was that Parliament has important work to do, that on parliamentary standards and on the economy, only this Parliament can clear up its own mess. Now, this, of course, is not remotely true, for in each case, the decisions that are to be made are so serious and public approval for them so essential that they would be far better carried out after all the debate, explanation, discussion and transparency that only a general election can bring. The government's argument is that it's impossible to interrupt proceedings for even a month to have a general election, but that we can interrupt them for nearly 3 months to have the summer recess. If Parliament is engaged in such important work at the moment, why is there so little business before the House of Commons this month? Why have a last session of Parliament beginning this autumn that can only be a few months in length? If you work it out, Mr Deputy Speaker, perhaps only 14 weeks available at maximum for legislation to be considered. And what has happened to the important legislation that was going through Parliament in this session, some of which has now mysteriously disappeared, namely the bill to allow part privatisation of the Royal Mail? The noble Lord Mandelson, whom I now believe we must deferentially refer to as the First Secretary of State, has said of this bill, the Royal Mail Bill, that it would be irresponsible of the government to allow delays to the measures needed to reform Royal Mail and secure the future of the Universal Postal Service. Any delay would merely serve to threaten the sustainability of the network. So the government's case against the dissolution of Parliament would be much stronger if they either knew whether and when they wanted to proceed with a measure they have said can stand no delay and is meant to be before Parliament now. Now, in mentioning the noble Lord Mandelson, I did not mean to send a chill down the spine of ministers opposite. But it is now impossible to discuss the operation of government or Parliament without reference to his opinions. The unelected Prime Minister has managed to produce the most powerful unelected deputy since Henry VIII appointed Cardinal Wolsey, except Cardinal Wolsey was more sensitive in his handling of colleagues than the noble Lord Mandelson. His personal retinue of 11 ministers, 6 of whom now attend upon him in the House of Lords, is the largest in the government, and the growth of the unelected portion of Her Majesty's government is further evidence of the need for the dissolution of Parliament and for the fresh air of electoral competition to blow through the dark recesses of several government departments. The Prime Minister, who lectures us all on democratic renewal, is appointing peers to positions of power on a scale unknown for decades. There are now more peers attending the Cabinet than at any time since the days of Harold Macmillan. Half the ministers in the Foreign Office now sit in the House of Lords, or are about to do so, including no less than the new Minister for Europe. So after years in which members on all sides of this House have called for better democratic scrutiny of EU decision-making, we have arrived at a situation where elected members of Parliament will be unable to question the Minister for Europe at all, and where a week before an important EU summit, the Minister is not available to either House of Parliament at all. This is not democratic renewal, but democratic reversal by the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister, who told us today about the importance of accountability and legitimacy, has just managed to appoint an enterprise czar in Sir Alan Sugar, when no one seems to know whether he will have government machinery reporting to him, and who apparently again cannot be questioned in either House of Parliament at all. And the Lord Mandelson denied the opportunity to become Foreign Secretary by the sad combination of a Prime Minister too weak to remove his Foreign Secretary being equally matched by a Foreign Secretary too weak to challenge the Prime Minister, has gone around instead collecting titles and even whole government departments to add to his name, now adding up to the Right Honourable the Baron Mandelson of Foy in the county of Herefordshire and Hartlepool in the county of Durham, First Secretary of State and Lord President of the Privy Council and Secretary of State for Business and Secretary of State for Innovation and Skills. It would be no surprise to wake up in the morning and find he had become an archbishop. We are left with a government which is exactly what happened with Cardinal Wolsey. And we are left with a government that is held together solely by fear. A Prime Minister unable to remove ministers in whom he has lost faith for fear they will quit altogether. Ministers unwilling to challenge a Prime Minister in whom they have lost faith for fear they will no longer be ministers. Backbenchers unwilling to remove a Prime Minister in whom they've certainly lost faith for fear of having to have an election. And all of them living in fear of one minister with a very long title whom at the last election nobody in the country ever voted for at all. That is the situation, locked together in this embrace of mutual terror and diminished legitimacy. The refusal of this government to face the voters can no longer be defended. There comes a point when democratic renewal is indeed necessary, and the country knows and understands that that is now. The Prime Minister today has made a statement on constitutional reform in an effort to justify his continuation in office. Leave aside the transparent desperation and sheer unadulterated cynicism of looking towards a referendum on voting reform only when he's seemingly lost hope of retaining power under the voting rules prevailing today, and that the referendum he did promise in the last general election manifesto on the European Constitution has never been held at all. Leave aside the fact that progress on House of Lords reform has been stymied by indecision or indifference during his term of office so far. Whatever the history of these proposals and whatever the merits, a Prime Minister at this stage of a Parliament can only command the real authority to implement such changes by including them in a general election manifesto and asking the country to approve them. But his objective is not to strengthen constitutional change by winning a mandate for it in a general election. It is to avert a general election by coming up with proposals for constitutional change, the exact reverse of true democratic accountability and legitimacy in government. No set of proposals can now overcome the fact that this is a Parliament that has lost its moral authority, and that the government derived from that Parliament has lost the unity, authority and confidence to govern in the national interest. The events of the last 8 days, in which 11 ministers have resigned from the government, have summed up for most voters the sense of decay and division which makes them want to be consulted about the future. The words of the resigning ministers speak for themselves. They require no embellishment by the opposition. The Honourable Lady, the member for Liverpool Wavertree: I have been unhappy about smears against colleagues, the undermining of colleagues and friends by number 10. The Right Honourable Member for Stalybridge and Hyde: I am calling on you, says to the Prime Minister, to stand aside to give our party a fighting chance of winning. The Honourable Lady, the member for Don Valley: several of the women attending Cabinet have been treated by you as little more than female window dressing. You have strained every sinew of loyalty. The Honourable Member for Northampton North, I quoted earlier: the person at the top has to forge a group of strong politicians into a united, coherent team to provide stable government, and that has painfully not happened either. The Honourable Member for Birkenhead: even I didn't think a Brown administration would be as inept as this one. The quotes go on. These are from that side of the House of Commons. It is not necessary to read them all out. It is almost impossible in the time available to read them all out. It is impossible to recall, even from the dark and dying days of other administrations, such condemnation of a government from within its own ranks. I've almost concluded, but we have to have the entertainment of listening to the right member.
I am deeply grateful to the Right Honourable Member for Richmond, whose family, of course, comes from my constituency. But can you tell me what the point is? It's wonderful. You can tell jokes about Lord Mandelson, and they're wonderful. Please tell more. We all love laughing at them. But what is the point of this speech? Why isn't the opposition tabled this? The opposition tabled this motion. Why are you coming in on the coattails of the Scottish nationalists?
Well, first of all, I think he was not just laughing at my joke about Lord Mandelson, he was laughing with my joke about Lord Mandelson. And this is sad news for him, because it means, in fact, it has already been reflected in the reshuffle that however desperate the government has been to find new ministers, they have sadly not turned to him. It is most unfortunate. But the point, I won't give away anymore, because I'm going to finish. I'm nearly at the end of my speech. She's so charming, the Honourable Lady for Conway. I give way.
I was worried for a minute that the Right Honourable Member was afraid of the member for Conway. I've sat very quietly listening to his speech, and I wasn't going to stand up until he said he was coming to the end of his speech. All I've heard for the last, and I'm looking at the clock, 15 minutes or so, is character assassination. I've heard nothing at all. I've heard nothing at all about policies, which I have to say that also, having listened to the chorus of the boys' club opposite, I haven't heard a single word about policies and why we should call a general election. Does the Right Honourable Member agree with the boys' club chorus from the nationalists that if we call for a general election and there's a change of government, do they think that Wales and Scotland are immune from the global economic situation the UK finds itself in? Could you please comment on that single policy?
Well, I can assure, first of all, I'm not afraid of any lady from Wales other than my mother-in-law, so she need not worry about that. And secondly, this is not, I have not indulged in any character assassination. Lord Mandelson will be most flattered by what I have said about him today. And there is no character assassination whatsoever, simply helping to build him up. But third, I think both I and the Honourable Member for Murray have made the strong case and the serious case that national democratic renewal, the phrase that constantly trips now from the tongue of the Prime Minister, can only be achieved by the renewal of a mandate or the renewal of an authority of Parliament across the whole range of policies to deal with the challenges of the world and national economic situation, of improving public services, of safeguarding national security. It has been the burden of my case from the beginning of my remarks that dealing with those things effectively requires a Parliament with the energy and new authority from the people to carry out whichever policies the people of this country wish to follow. And so, as the Prime Minister presides over his National Democratic Renewal Council, let him reflect that the answer to this country's problems and the unprecedented contempt in which our politics is held cannot lie in another committee led by him. If committees led by the Prime Minister did any good, the country would not be in this mess, and the party opposite would not be at its most unpopular since the First World War. What this country needs is a real democratic renewal in which every one of its citizens can take part. It is a committee with the broadest membership possible, including the entire nation. It is a long-established tradition called a general election, open to all. Everyone in the country gets to have their say, and at the end of the process our democracy is strengthened and renewed. That is what the country wants, that is what our democracy needs, and that is why we will vote this evening for the motion calling for this Parliament to be dissolved and the people of Britain to decide their own future.
Dr. Tony Wright. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I thought in the first part of the debate that I'd intruded into some sort of private feud. It's now become much more fun, and I enjoyed the right honourable gentleman from Richmond hugely, and I'm sorry to inject, and I shall be very brief, inject just a very short note of realism into our proceedings, and I did try to when the honourable gentleman was speaking, when I asked him if he could tell me of all these occasions when governments had called elections because oppositions had asked for them. And of course, there are no such occasions. I think the problem with what's being proposed is, I'm not going to give way I'm not going to give way for the moment. I shall give way, but not just for the moment. And I think there are two problems with what's being proposed. One is that it's dishonest, and one is that it's dangerous. And I'm sorry to be rather serious about that, but I do think I want to be serious. It's dishonest because the proposers of the motion know that it's not going to happen. It's dishonest. It's dishonest because it's part of the game that we play, and it's the game that we play that is contributing greatly to the regard in which we're held outside. There is a constitutional illiteracy in believing, even that if a party changed its leader between elections, that somehow there should be an election, because we don't have a presidential system. We have a party system where parties present themselves to the electorate periodically. So some of the arguments that we've heard in recent times have been preposterous. The fact is, governments with secure majorities don't call elections. They call elections when they want to. I'm very happy now to give way.
Well, I seem to remember, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that in both 1983 and 1987, governments with healthy Conservative majorities called an election a year earlier than they needed to. Now, he may say that the opposition didn't ask for an election at that time, but if the opposition didn't ask for an election at that time, it was probably only because they knew the government was so hugely popular that if they asked for an election, they'd lose it, which in fact happened to be the case. But governments do go to the country early, and they do go to the country when they want a mandate, and they could do that equally well on this occasion.
The argument is not that governments don't go to the electorate early. Of course they do. I mean, governments go to the electorate when they think that it's to their maximum advantage to do so. That is a truism of all governments in all times. This is the truism that I'm just trying to pass on in a humble way to the House, which is why it is essentially dishonest to claim that there's some kind of other constitutional position which demands an election at other times. There is no such position. And there is no such precedent. Now, that's one argument. The second one, very, very briefly, yeah.
Would the honourable gentleman agree with me that possibility, the answer to his question, is 1945? Because when the wartime coalition broke up and the Labour Party refused to serve in a national government any longer, they asked for a general election. A Conservative government was formed, and then the Conservative government under Winston Churchill gave the country an election.
Well, I don't want. I'm very happy. I'm very happy to discuss 1945.
There hadn't been an election for 10 years.
In considerable detail, but I don't think the honourable gentleman particularly wants to.
5 years over.
I want, if I may, just to. Well, I want just to make this point, if I may, because I think this is the point that I really want to make, and I would ask honourable members. I know that. And if we were in the opposite position, we'd be saying exactly the same kind of things, because this is what oppositions do. That's the game that we play. But I do want to suggest to the House. Well, can I make the argument before you have a go at me on it? I do want to suggest to the House that we are at a particularly exceptional moment. There is a tidal wave of anti-politics running through this country at the moment. I don't think anybody can deny that. And the choice before us, and the choice before all parties, I think, is do we seek to ride that tidal wave and try to extract some partisan advantage from it? And I can see the temptations of doing that. All opposition parties will get some reward from riding that tidal wave? Or do we try to turn the wave around? And I do say that if we don't together come and turn that wave around, we are in deep trouble. And I do think, therefore, that irrespective of the usual games that we play, we do have a particular responsibility in this House now, seriously now, together, across party, to put aside the game and to try and rebuild some faith in this system. And until we do that, we shall not be able to look the electorate in the eye and ask properly for their support.
On that very point, I happen to agree in large part with his analysis, but he would recognise surely that this isn't a game just played by opposition parties. One of the great frustrations has been that this government has actually been the master of spin, which is very much what he's describing. How does he foresee the opposition and also the party of government to shift away from the spin, which has eroded the confidence of the public in what they hear from us, and replace that with honesty and content?
Well, I think, if I may say so, I've said a good deal of that over the years, and I don't really want to go there again, because I think and hope that we have moved on. What I'm trying to say is, I think, and of course you may disagree with me, but I think it's pretty evident from what's happened in recent weeks and what happened last week. We've got a house that is burning down. It seems a very bizarre moment to start saying, shall we have a competition to decide which colour to paint it in? We have to stop. We have to put the fire out.
Order. Can I just say, it's only fair to listen to the honourable gentleman addressing the House. If people want to make interventions, they should do so in the normal way, not from a sedentary position. Dr. Wright.
Thank you very much. I simply say that we ought to put the fire out. And if you don't think we've got a fire that's burning pretty furiously at the moment, I don't think you are really listening to the electorate that you keep referring to. Of course, I'll give one.
Very grateful to the honourable member and my near neighbour in Cannock. The mixed metaphors of a tidal wave approaching and a fire in a house. It seems to me that the tidal wave might put the fire out. In truth, though, isn't the whole point that this Parliament is dead? And it needs renewal, our democratic system. The agenda is in place. The reforms that we seek are going to be done by an independent authority. This is not a party matter. Every party in this House is affected by the honourable member's tidal wave. That is the substance behind the argument that democracy must have its say, and the people out there form their new parliament.
I apologise for the mixing of metaphors, but I don't apologise for the argument. I do think we're in the condition that I describe, and I do think there are millions of people out there who are saying that they want nothing to do with this political system until we put our system in order. Now, you may disagree with that analysis, but I think that's the position that we're in, and we have a duty and a responsibility to do that, and to do it now.
To the honourable gentleman for giving way, and I'm trying to listen very patiently to his contorted logic. But does he think for a minute that the public want this Parliament, this manure Parliament, to resolve some of these important issues? Surely it is right that we have a new group of people in this place to decide how we go forward, not this degraded house and establishment just now.
Well, that's the argument that's been put repeatedly, but in a curious way, and this is not unique, because it's often the case that out of some great scandal, disaster, catastrophe, an opportunity presents itself. And now I'm struck by the fact that arguments that people like me have been making over the years for improving the way in which this Parliament works in a variety of ways, we've made little headway. Suddenly, I do mind the reasons that have caused it, but there happens now to be an opportunity to do something. Now, I think that opportunity is worth taking, because they don't come very often. It's a shame that it's come in the way that it has, out of the circumstances that we've found ourselves in. But my goodness, it's a real opportunity, and we should take it. I want to say one final thing, and then I shall stop, which is, I wish very much that the nationalist parties had come forward with a different sort of proposition today. I wish they had come forward with a motion on fixed-term parliaments, because I would have supported them, and I'd have supported them with enthusiasm, because when we were setting up the new parliaments in Scotland and in Wales, it would have been thought preposterous to set those up in a way which gave the ability to decide the timing of an election to those people who are in office at the particular moment. Of course I'll give way.
Thank the honourable member for giving way, and I think he's making more thoughtful comments than some of his colleagues perhaps have during this debate so far. I wonder if he would go further beyond the point of a fixed-term parliament and consider that actually proportional representation is a key part of both the Scottish and Welsh parliaments, and would strengthen this place because it combines both the party and the individual.
I do believe the time has come to look at various voting systems. And I do think we have a chance now to look quite freshly at what kind of voting system would be most appropriate for Westminster. But he's not going to lead me into the whole constitutional agenda, because although I'm tempted, I don't want to go there, and the House doesn't really want me to go there either. But I do think, as I'm trying to say, that if the Nationalist Party had come forward with that single sensible proposition, that instead, and it's a proposition, by the way, which, as I said to the Prime Minister earlier on, was in our party's manifesto when I was elected in 1992, and it's something that I've tried to promote ever since. But now suddenly, everyone seems to be in favour of, including possibly the main opposition party, although we're never quite sure about that. But this would be a genuine constitutional innovation. And it would have the great merit, that we could dispense with debates like this. We could dispense with this game playing that we do all the time, this constant nonsense of calling for elections. And I can tell you something, that will bring huge relief to the electorate.
David Heath.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. As always, it's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman for Cannock Chase, but I have to say to him that if he wanted a fixed-term Parliament bill, there was one in this session of Parliament, introduced by my honourable friend from Cambridge, supported by myself, and rejected by the government front bench, by the Conservative front bench. So the idea that these are the people who will lead us through to the reforms that we so urgently need, I think, is a mistaken impression. And that is why I am very happy not only to congratulate the Honourable Member for Murray on his proposal today, but to support it, both in my own name and on behalf of my party. And can I give glad tidings to the nationalist members of honourable members today, because there's just a party in my constituency, maybe in Cymru, the Nationalist Party of Cornwall, contrived to get 92 votes in Somerset for the independence of Cornwall, which I think is a significant achievement. The bad news, I'm afraid, is that they did not beat the Labour Party in my constituency. The Labour Party came 6th, but maybe in Cymru did not beat them on that occasion. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are 2 reasons why we should support this proposal today. The first, and it's of course already been touched on, is that this House, is catastrophically compromised. It has a monumental loss of respect, and each and every honourable and right honourable member of this House now needs a new mandate from the people we represent. We need to know that we still enjoy the support of those who send us here. The second reason is because this government is tired, it's rudderless, it doesn't know what it's doing, it has a Prime Minister with no credibility, and a Prime Minister that is not providing leadership. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this cannot go on. We cannot have, for the best part of another year, some form of zombie government, deceased but not yet interred, stumbling on, uncomprehending and without vision. That is not in the interests of this country, and that is why a general election is necessary. Now, the truth, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is in their heart of hearts, every single party represented here doesn't actually want an immediate election. Well, no matter what they say, they don't actually desperately want to go straight back onto the doorsteps of the nation so soon after a long and bruising campaign for the local and European parliamentary elections, one which was not the result of which was not an overwhelming sense of enthusiasm from the general public, judging by the turnout. I don't think we desperately want to do that. I don't think we desperately want to go back onto the doorsteps to hear the comments of some of our electors, which have not been universally complimentary about politicians of any hue, because they have judged this House and found it wanting from what they have been told by the press. And I don't believe that any of the parties is entirely prepared for an election. I mean, the Conservative Party, for instance, would have to find some policies to fight an election next week. And they are not prepared, palpably not yet prepared. But, and this is the crucial point, these are all essentially self-serving arguments. These are arguments about the policies and the politics of the political parties in this House. And they are not about what this country needs and what the people of this country needs. And whether we are ready for an election or not, I believe the public are. So, going back to what I said, the respect for Parliament, I think, is a crucial factor. And the collapse of the respect for this House is a major reason for letting the public have their say. It affects all honourable members, including those who have neither done any wrong nor have ever been accused of doing anything wrong. We know, and unless we are unnaturally purblind in this respect, we know that we need to give the electorate the opportunity to back or sack each and every one of us. As Robert Louis Stevenson once said, we all know what Parliament is, and we are all ashamed of it. Not what it can be, but what it is at this moment. The second argument is the collapse of confidence in the Prime Minister. Now, if there's one clear conclusion that we can draw, Mr. Deputy Speaker, from the results of last week, it is that the Prime Minister no longer has the confidence of the people of this country. Indeed, he no longer has the confidence even of members of his own party. And again, I hate to quote too much in a speech, but in the immortal words of the Hollies, he's not the man to hold your trust. Everything he does turns to dust.
Which key was that in?
I'll sing it to the honourable gentleman later, if he makes an appointment. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is why we need an immediate election. There is, of course, a counter-argument. There is a counter-argument that we have heard in a rather inadequate way, I may say, expressed by the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Secretary of State for Wales. He says that we face unprecedented economic difficulties. Well, that's absolutely right. Now, this is a crucial time for this country. But that is why it is so important that we actually have a mandate for those very difficult policies. The government have done some things which I support, and some of those have been bold policies. But they cannot say that they have the support of the British people in doing so, and the consequences will be with us for a very long time. And I simply don't buy the notion that you cannot have an election in the middle of an economic crisis because, as the Right Honourable Gentleman for Richmond quite rightly says, major democracies across the world have been doing that and have prospered as a consequence. The second argument is the one I think that the Honourable Gentleman for Cannock Chase was putting forward to some extent, that this Parliament has got us into a mess, and therefore this Parliament and this government need to clear up the mess. It's a sort of polluter pays principle, but the trouble is it's actually the taxpayer who's paying and the polluter who stays. Exactly. And that is what so many of our fellow countrymen find so difficult to accept. And the argument would be easier, I think, easier to accept if there were a clear timetable and a very, very quick timetable for some of these improvements which are now being talked of. But every time I hear the Prime Minister, I fail to hear that timetable. I fail to hear that urgency that is necessary if we're to do this job quickly and clinically and enable us to go to the country at an early date. I, of course, give way.
I've heard this a few times about people saying things are going to change, things are going to be structurally different, we're waiting for it to happen. Now, my understanding is, in the document we sent out to every single member, that the House has decided, and I believe led by the Prime Minister, that there will be no more allowances for anyone to purchase any furniture at all. So even members who had to give back the price of their trouser press will not be tempted to buy a trouser press and ask the taxpayer to pay. That the sum of money available to rent or to pay a mortgage on a second home, which I believe should be a home in London, will be reduced to £1,250. The Leader of the Opposition will no longer be able to claim £1,700 per month for his mortgage. These things have already been done. They are in place. They have been ruled on by the Members' Estimates Committee. They are binding at this moment. No minister will be allowed, or anyone will be allowed, to have a house outside London.
Order. I think the Honourable Gentleman has made his point. David Heath.
Not only has he made his point, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but he's actually undermined his own argument. Because if we believe that everything in the garden is now rosy, then there is no obstacle to the general election, which some of us believe now ought to be the case. Now, I don't think that. I think that we have done some very basic things which some of us actually called for a very long time ago, which are now in place, but it is far insufficient to meet the needs. And if the Honourable Gentleman really thinks that that is sufficient to regain the trust of the electorate, then I can only suggest he has not been on the doorstep over recent weeks with sufficient assiduity. The third argument for not having a general election now is, again, the point that the Right Honourable Gentleman for Richmond made so amusingly about the chaos theory. The chaos theory of the government, of the Prime Minister, that this is that somehow we will be plunged into irremediable chaos were we to have a general election. Now, I don't buy that for one moment, but can I just share something I seem to remember from my days a long time ago attempting to do physiological sciences, that there is a sort of chaos which is often observed at a microscopic level, with very, very small organisms within an aqueous medium. It is called Brownian motion. And I think Brownian motion is what we have seen from this government recently. So what has been the response of the government to this crisis of confidence in both the House and the government. Well, of course, we've had yet another relaunch. I mean, this Prime Minister is sadly getting to the similar situation to the former Right Honourable Member for Huntingdon, in having very regular relaunches, relaunched almost as many times as the Padstow lifeboat. And it never really does the job, because you can only relaunch so many times when your boat is leaking below the waterline, and that is the situation at the moment. We have a re-engineered cabinet. Already we have a department that was created only a year ago, which has been subsumed within another one. Purely, it would appear, for the greater glorification of the noble Lord, the Lord Mandelson. And I won't go through the whole of his nomenclature as the Right Honourable gentleman did, but it does occur to me that there will need to be very, very wide doors in this new department if his name is to be displayed appropriately. We have the new cabinet. Now, is anybody excited by this new cabinet? Does anyone feel that this is a new cabinet which is going to supply the answers to the country's problems? As the Right Honourable gentleman said, 7 members attending cabinet who are not elected members. That would be a situation familiar to the third Marquess of Salisbury, I think, rather than a government in the 21st century. And yet that is what we now have. And it does suggest that there is a conspicuous lack of talent in this elected House, if that is what the Prime Minister has to rely on. Or perhaps it is that those who will serve in his cabinet don't have the talent, and those who have the talent won't serve in his cabinet. Either way, it does not suggest, it seems to me, a Prime Minister with the confidence either of his colleagues or of the country. And then, lastly, we have what we heard earlier today, this cobbled-together programme of constitutional change, picking up bits and pieces that other people have been suggesting over the years, but all developed in this secretive and obscure way, which is the modus operandi always of this Prime Minister. It tells you everything you need to know about the Prime Minister, that his idea of consensus is to have this Committee of Public Safety, or whatever it's called, with no opposition parties invited to contribute at all. This is the way of building consensus, isn't it? Don't invite anyone who might disagree with you, because then you establish immediate consensus. The statement issued to the leaders of the other parties a quarter of an hour today before Prime Minister's questions. And then the Prime Minister challenges them to establish the consensus by agreeing with what he and his cronies have put together as a proposal for a constitutional change. And then he has the gall to say that this is the new politics. This is the change. This is the way you are now going to do things in order to establish a new democratic renewal based on the agreement of all parties and people across the country. He says he is the man. He said it repeatedly. He is the man to cure Parliament of its ills. Well, let me tell you something else. He is the man who, when the Right Honourable gentleman for Penrith and the Borders was trying to exempt this House from freedom of information legislation, and you can all look it up on the 20th of April 2007, Hansard, he was the man who couldn't be bothered to turn up and vote. That was the sort of leadership the Prime Minister showed. He allowed he allowed government whips to do their job, to help the bill go through. He allowed them to vote, and he absented himself. And so did the Right Honourable gentleman, the member for Neath. He is the man who, on the 3rd of July 2009, last year, 2008, when there was a perfectly proper proposal from the House of Commons Commission to bring in independent audit of members' allowances, he is the man who, again, was not there was not there to support that proposal, allowed it to be amended out of the proposals from the Commission. And so this House managed to escape for yet another year from proper independent audit of allowances. And he now says he is the man to reform the system in this House. He is not the man. He is not the man because he is not the leader. He is in fact an obstacle to reform and has been now for 12 years. I give way.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. He was talking about the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister has only been here for 11% of divisions since becoming Prime Minister. By contrast, the First Minister of Scotland has attended 86% of divisions in the Scottish Parliament.
I'm not sure that's exactly the statistic I would have used had I been the honourable gentleman, but nevertheless, it is immediately apparent that there is a lack of leadership, and that leadership is not coming from the front. It's not even coming from the back. It's not even coming from behind the home lines. This Prime Minister is failing in his duty to provide leadership, and therefore I have personally no confidence in the Prime Minister or his government. I believe that my constituents have no confidence in this Prime Minister or the government. And my worry is not that they have no confidence in the Labour Party and its doings. My worry is that they have no confidence in Parliament itself. And that is enormously dangerous to our democracy in this country. If our electors do not have confidence in this House to do the job for which it's elected, then this House is doing an enormous disservice to the interests of democracy. And that shouldn't, I think, be a matter for any one party to sort out. It is a matter for the public to sort out. And, frankly, it shouldn't be a matter for the Prime Minister and his gang to decide whether there should be a general election. It should be for the people to decide whether there is a general election. We haven't got fixed-term parliaments in this constituency. We have a system whereby the government of the day chooses. Well, so be it. But they must listen. And at the moment, they are not listening to what the public say. There is only one solution, it seems to me, to the predicament in which we now find ourselves, and that is to let the people decide through the ballot box, and they should do so forthwith.
Anne Maguire.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. First of all, can I say it was a great pleasure to listen to the Right Honourable Member for Richmond. I always felt somewhat deprived. I was never able, because of my political affiliations no doubt, to attend one of his famous after-dinner speeches. But I also feel it's been a great privilege here today that I heard an outstanding example of a pre-dinner speech for free, and I congratulate him on that. I would have given more credence to his analysis about calling for an early general election if he hadn't been part of a government in 1997 that hung on to almost the last minute of the last hour of the last day before they called their own general election. So I think, I know a week's a long time in politics and we can all have selected memories, but as I say, I enjoyed the contribution, if not the outcome. No, not just now. I think I was offering... I think I was offering some praise. All right then. You tempt me. I don't know why, but you do. Sorry, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Any women who say that to me, actually. It's not a case of selective memory. It's the memory, indeed the precise memory of what happened in 1997 that makes my right honourable friend and many of us think that we shouldn't go through all that again.
And as my honourable friend and member for Aberdeen South says, and 92, I think that was a valiant attempt, not at seduction, but at trying to make an argument out of very little. I also want to, though, congratulate my right honourable friend, the member for Cannock Chase, because I thought that he gave a very considered analysis of where we are just now and why, in fact, we should reject the motion that has been put before us. And I should say, I think, Mr Deputy Speaker, that if honourable members in this House essentially have no confidence in Her Majesty's government, then that is the motion that we should be debating today, not some camouflage about general elections being called because it suits everybody. As my honourable friend, the member for Cannock Chase, said, it is the tradition within the British system up until now, and it may change. We may go to a system of fixed parliaments, and some of us, I think, are quite attracted to that idea. But up until now, it is the situation that it is the responsibility or the prerogative of the Prime Minister of the day when to call a general election. And I think, frankly, that some of the arguments that we've heard here this afternoon have been quite spurious in trying to justify what, frankly, is an unjustifiable position. But I want to pick up on the Nationalists putting forward this motion because, frankly, I am astonished that they have decided to choose this particular subject for a debate at this particular time, when the country, along with the rest of the world, faces the most serious financial and economic crisis in a generation, and they have chosen to use their valuable opposition time to engage in what I can only call superficial posturing. I would have thought they might have wanted to have a debate on how this country, this government, this Parliament has actually dealt with an economic crisis. And perhaps could I suggest the honourable gentleman for Tayside says badly. Well, could I suggest that perhaps he should have put down a motion asking us to compare how this government has dealt with an economic crisis, and let's compare it with some of the countries in the arc of prosperity that they were so fond of, because we could then have compared how this government is dealing with the current economic crisis with Ireland, for example, where there's been a 25% cut in public services. Compare that with what is happening in Britain, where benefits for the over 70s were being cut radically. Compare that with what is happening in this country, where VAT, where VAT is over 20% now, when in this country the government cut VAT, where the manufacturing base has collapsed and where the construction industry has all but collapsed. That would have been a valid debate in the current times. I'll take my honourable friend.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. I think it might be useful actually to look at what this government did to save the Scottish economy at the same time. Over £60 billion went into saving the two Scottish banks who basically caused this crisis. Lord Minor said in front of evidence in my committee last week, the European Scrutiny Committee, we must not forget that the cause of the collapse of the economy lies with the banks, and particularly with the Scottish banks, where we now have £200 billion of toxic debt, which we took on board to save the Scottish economy, which was much lauded by the opposition parties.
And the reality is that had the Nationalists had their way, and we were a separated country from the rest of the United Kingdom, those two major financial institutions would not have survived the economic tsunami that swept over them last autumn. But the honourable gentleman, no, I'm going to come to the honourable gentleman just in a second or two, so he might want to hold on to his powder just now. I'm sorry the honourable gentleman for Murray is not in the chamber at the moment, but he did highlight opinion polls and what they tell us. He failed to recognise that yesterday the BBC ComRes poll in the Daily Politics showed that the majority of Scots actually were opposed to a general election, were opposed to Gordon Brown resigning, the honourable member for Kirkcaldy resigning, and they rejected the alternative of the Leader of the Opposition as a Prime Minister. Should the honourable member for Kirkcaldy resign immediately? According to the poll, 68% of Scots said no. Should there be a general election now? 52% said no. Do you agree with the statement that the Leader of the Opposition has what it takes to be a good Prime Minister? 55% no. So if we're going to start and trade opinion polls, let's put them all on the table and not just the selective few that the honourable gentleman from Murray decided to put to us today. But frankly, Mr Deputy Speaker, the SNP are indulging in what they do best, which is playground politics, when the people of Scotland and indeed the people of the United Kingdom are looking to government to support them through the challenges that they face in coping with the recession. They are looking in Scotland and across the United Kingdom to a government that will continue to invest in our public services through these difficult times. And they are looking at, I'll take the honourable gentleman a minute, and they are looking at this Parliament to ensure that we deal with a discredited expenses regime which has brought us all shame and embarrassment. Yes.
The Honourable Lady is confident of the government's performance. Surely she has nothing at all to fear from a general election.
This is what I think my honourable friend, the member for Cannock Chase, was highlighting. Of course, if every time the honourable gentleman and his colleagues and the opposition benches called for a general election, heavens help us, we'd be in and out of general elections more often than tongue could tell. The reality is that the constitutional position is, at the moment, that it is the Prime Minister and the Government's prerogative to go to the Queen and ask for a general election. If the opposition benches want to say they have no confidence in Her Majesty's Government, then they should have the courage of the convictions to say that and not to try and cloak it with some sort of camouflage around a general election which will do for us all. But the honourable gentleman, and I'm sorry that the right honourable gentleman for Banff and Buchan is not in his place, he paid us a state visit today for a few minutes. But I would say that the honourable member for Banff and Buchan actually would be far better looking at how the construction industry in Scotland is falling off a cliff because the Scottish Futures Trust is not up and running. And I would ask the House to consider what sort of political judgment is it of a First Minister who despises the union of the nations of the United Kingdom but comes to the embodiment of that union in this Parliament to take part in what frankly is a piece of political theatre when as a member of the Scottish Parliament he should be voting to ensure that important legislation on sexual offences is being debated and voted upon in the Scottish Parliament, a body of which he is the political leader. And I'm sorry that he's not here in his place, but he certainly trailed to the whole of the media in Scotland that he was going to be here to participate in this debate today. I'll take my honourable friend from Woco.
I thank my honourable friend for that. Will she not agree with me that the theatre we're seeing today is bathed in nothing other than the nationalists' desire for independence because Scotland will not tolerate a Conservative government led by the honourable gentleman for Whitney?
And I think actually, and this is a plea to the Conservatives, and indeed perhaps even to some of the thinking Liberals, that they really do need to be very careful. They really do need to be very careful when they get into bed with the Nationalists. The Nationalists are not about making this democracy stronger. They are not about making this House stronger. They are about taking Scotland out of the United Kingdom. And that is why we have this particular debate today, because it's another opportunity to pursue that agenda. But we shouldn't be surprised, Mr Deputy Speaker, because bringing down a Labour government actually is part of the SNP's DNA. Right. They did it once and they hope they can do it again. And I challenge honourable members representing the SNP in this House to look at what happened the last time they got into bed with the Conservatives. The honourable gentleman from actually, I can deal with the honourable gentleman from Tayside quite.
Or we can't have these interventions from the centre position. It's serious, which simply spark off interventions across the House. It's only fair to the honourable lady to listen to what she's saying. Anne Maguire.
The honourable gentleman said that us got beat. I would remind the honourable gentleman that the price that the Scottish National Party paid in 1979 was to go down from 11 MPs to 2 MPs because the Scottish people saw through the ruse that they perpetrated. I'll take the honourable gentleman now, but you'll have a second chance in a few moments.
All right, I appreciate that.
Look at you.
Member giving way. But I just wonder if she would accept that in 1979 the Scottish people could see a difference between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. But now the Scottish people cannot see a difference because on Iraq, raw mail privatisation, Trident and budget cuts, they're both the same.
Actually, in some respects, I wish I hadn't let the honourable gentleman, because I'm going to deal with some of those issues in a minute with some personal information which he might find interesting. But I want to ask the House to reflect on the situation in 1979 when the leader of the Nationalists in his House was the late Donald Stewart, an honourable and conscientious Member of Parliament. I think that was agreed on all sides. However, in his speech to the House of the 28th of March, during the debate of the no confidence motion, he told the House that Mrs Thatcher, now the noble Baroness Thatcher, would be educated by the Scottish people. Well, frankly, Mr Deputy Speaker, if ever a good man called it wrong, this was it. I often wonder if in those 18 long years of the last Conservative government, that either the late Donald Stewart or any of those 10 other Nationalist MPs ever spared to reflect in sorrow of the consequences of their actions that night. And as I said earlier, some of them had plenty of time to reflect because 9 of them didn't come back to this House. Yes, I'll take the honourable gentleman.
I wonder if during those long 18 years of Tory rule over Scotland without a mandate, would the honourable lady prefer an independent Scotland, perhaps led by a Labour government with maybe Donald Stewart at the helm?
You know, this is such a hoary old chestnut about, whether or not you would just want an independent Scotland. The reality is that, as the honourable gentleman well knows, we on this side do not accept that an independent Scotland is the way in which we want to go forward in the 21st century. We do believe that we are stronger together than we are apart. Now, I appreciate that the honourable gentleman has a fundamental difference of opinion with us, and I have no objection to him taking an opposite view. But to be frank, that sort of question actually is spurious, if I could use that word again. But I want to come to the honourable member for Glasgow East, because the other night I heard him saying on the radio that he would bring down any UK government because he was a nationalist, or words to that effect. Well, his constituency, and he can rub his hands with glee, his constituency is one that I grew up in, and one that my father represented as a regional councillor in the old Strathclyde region when it was Glasgow Province. And can I say to the honourable gentleman that he might think it's fun to bring down a UK government, but when he and his then colleagues, or his erstwhile colleagues in those days, rushed to bring down a Labour government, they ushered in some of the darkest days of the communities that he now represents. A community that he represents now was almost destroyed by unemployment and deprivation during those years. And when that Conservative government was prepared to stand back and let things take their course, when the unemployment rate in Glasgow Province, the predecessor constituency, was round about 35%. No, I'm dealing with an area that I know particularly well. When the unemployment rate was 35%, and when by 1988 some 57% of working women in Scotland didn't have a wage that would support them. There were streets in that community that I grew up in when once everybody went out to work, and by the end of the Thatcher years, nobody went out to work. That was the price that the Nationalists thought was worth paying in 1979, and to be frank, the honourable gentleman and his colleagues are leopards that have never changed their spots. Yes.
Isn't it a case, though, that if the Labour government at the time had not gerrymandered the result of the referendum in Scotland, the people of Glasgow and the people of Scotland would have had a Scottish Parliament then to protect them through the dark days of Thatcherism. And that's the responsibility of the Labour government at the time.
Frankly, I think the honourable gentleman should go back and read the debate of the 1979 motion of no confidence and some of the lead-up, and see what was offered by the then Prime Minister James Callaghan in order to try and deal with some of the issues on the referendum debate. And what happened then was a nationalist group decided to put their faith in a Conservative leader and tell the people of Scotland that she would be educated by them. She was no more educated by them than flying the air. So I want to say that even in my own Yes, the honourable gentleman is entitled to come in now.
I appreciate the honourable lady generously giving way for a second time, having mentioned my constituency. Would you accept that something strange happened last summer because an area of this country, even if we call it the UK, where people have voted Labour faithfully at council and all elections for years and decades, have somehow lost trust with the Labour Party and did not vote for the Labour Party?
Actually, I don't want to go into the history lessons of the honourable gentleman's particular area. I'm not nearly as good at history as the right honourable member for Richmond. But can I say to him, if he looks at his own constituency, he will find actually that at one point it was represented by 3 nationalist councillors, and indeed he himself represented a third of that constituency. So to try and suggest that somehow people in his constituency had never flirted with other political parties is, frankly, I don't want to use the words untrue, but is not quite accurately reflecting the picture. But I want to draw my remarks to a conclusion by looking at... Yes?
Just on that issue of history, maybe my right honourable friend might want to comment on the history that was created last Thursday in the honourable gentleman's constituency in the European elections, which showed something quite different to the honourable gentleman is alluding to the House.
Well, I understand, and I wasn't at the count in Glasgow, but I certainly understand that the way in which the particular district was counted certainly gave a strong indication that perhaps the honourable gentleman, to use a well-known Scottish phrase, might find it his jackets on a sugary nail, and I will translate that later for the purposes of Hansard accuracy. But can I look just briefly at my own constituency as well? I have mining villages which were decimated during those 18 long years. Lives were shattered, people were marginalised by a government that engaged in a political strategy to smash a mining industry and failed to provide any alternative employment. And there are rural areas in my constituency where there was no investment in education or transport facilities. And frankly, it took the re-emergence of a Labour government and then a Labour-led Scottish executive to ensure that the schools in my constituency were either rebuilt or refurbished. And a new hospital, which had been a dream for some 40 or 50 years, a dream that I think the constituents of my honourable friend, the member from Oakhill, shared, was commissioned under that executive. So I say to the Nationalists, put your political posturing to one side. The last time you did this, it cost the Scottish people dear. Tonight, you will have a large number of people, of honourable members, with you through the lobbies. Frankly, don't be flattered, because they flatter to deceive, in the same way as they did the last time. But I say this finally to the House. The Nationalists are playing political games when people in Scotland and people across the United Kingdom are looking to this government, and indeed to the Scottish Government, for responsibility and leadership to get us through difficult times. This is self-indulgence of the worst kind, and it exposes the SNP and indeed their colleagues in Plaid Cymru, who, yes, the last time didn't vote to bring down a Labour government, but exposes them to be used by a Conservative party, which, if ever given the chance again, would introduce a spending regime which, albeit will be cloaked in different and softer words, but would make it almost impossible for them and us to deliver the sort of services to the Scottish people and indeed to people across the United Kingdom. The last time the Scottish Nationalists played midwife to a Tory government, they thought it was a price worth paying. We on this side of the House will try all that we can to prevent that ever happening again.
I'm very grateful to the honourable member for Moray for introducing this motion. It's very rarely that we come to debate something so broad as the dissolution of the House. If I may, I won't follow their line of argument, and I regret that I'm unable to follow the position of the Secretary of State for Wales, and can only reflect that perhaps he was distracted by the thought that he was securing his position as a new cabinet minister, and therefore couldn't really give his attention to the issue. This isn't about the popularity or otherwise of a government, in truth. Governments are unpopular from time to time. It isn't indeed just about the unpopularity of a prime minister. Goodness, if we got rid of prime ministers just because they were unpopular, we would never have a public policy in this country. This is about more, the dissolution of Parliament. And that means us going to face the people as well. I don't want to follow the line which was so adequately, heroically addressed by my right honourable friend who spoke from our front benches. It is the classic and the great spirit of Parliament to mock, to identify, to twist the truths into the nerves of those that face us across the bench. It was a compelling argument and a profoundly good performance as a parliamentarian. What I want to look at is actually the argument that my right honourable friend could not address, because at that stage it had not been made. And that is, of course, the argument of the honourable member, the member for Cannock. If I understand it correctly, he says that in this awful time, when the House is at its greatest discount, when it is judged by the public, possibly not even reasonably, because of the extent of their present fury, that this is essentially not a time to have an election, because the electorate may sweep away in its rage and anger that which may be good or may be right about this House. It is a profoundly important argument because this House, as a collective and with a government, has in its time been profoundly unpopular. We only have to think of the Long March, of which the Labour Party was an intimate part, but the Long March of reaching democratic and accountable government. In 1832, this House and the other place feared revolution. They wanted to hold by their established ways of doing things. The men of Birmingham and Wolverhampton marched through Walsall to acquire, that was what they sought, some form of limited, tinily limited representation. And this country hung on the edge of people harumping there would be revolution, and that which was good would be swept away. In the event, the moderation and the reasonableness of the people of Britain, I'll say, but in this particular instance, the people of England, was successful. That tiny step was taken. 1865, what an extraordinary thing. A Prime Minister in 1860 had set his mind against a further extension that would actually enfranchise a larger part of this nation. Set his face against it. Gladstone was Prime Minister and could not achieve it. Disraeli, in fact, with the cooperation of Gladstone and the voice and arguments of Bright across this land, achieved something that shaped and formed the character of the chamber in which we stand today. Do not doubt, reaction would have seen that off. So, can you sweep away by revolutionary responses, because that's really how many people feel out there, that in their rage, an understandable rage, they sweep away us, they sweep away continuity. Well, I have to address what my what the honourable member for Cannock said. I actually do not fear that. Half this House will probably remain, and half this House will leave. There is in that turn a natural renewal of the House at whatever time an election comes. The argument then returns, if you do not fear it, if you do not think that the electorate is making an irrational judgment, and who are we to claim that, in fact? Is that not the position of self-satisfaction, self-serving? Is it not the right of the people if it judges when a government should change? No, we have constitutional practice. A government is in place, by statute no less, for 5 years. We're now 4 years. The tradition in this country is that, by and large, a modern government seeks a 4-year term. But you extend that, or we can extend that, because there are important and necessary things to be done to prepare the new Parliament for a better, perhaps, prospect. And that is where my right honourable's friend comes into play. What are these important things? Of course, the economy is the thing that grinds away in my constituency, along with a contempt for the way in which we, as individuals, have handled expenses. It's the economy, isn't it, in truth? That's what we should be justifying ourselves. We, on the backbenches, are not the government. We are those who hold the government to account. And it's not that function that is solely and exclusively that of those on these benches. This House has lost its lustre because people who stood as Labour members, who believe in Labour policies, did not think it necessary to examine properly and insist that government and policies should be argued and reasoned, and that they could go forth to convince the people that their government's policies were worthy because the government won the argument. Now what, unfortunately, the evacuation of the Secretary of State for Wales meant that he could never answer the questions put by my right honourable friend as to the conduct of business. What we're looking for, and what there is an opportunity, as the honourable member for Cannock said, is that this House can revive itself. I believe that profoundly. But with this personnel, with these members, it cannot have the confidence, it cannot have the authority to sustain a government, because that's what a House collectively does. The government of our country. There is no purpose now. The reform of expenses is now taken out of the hands, effectively, of this House. Why? Because the people have shown their derision and scorn at it. It was mentioned, freedom of information. One only has to look at the list of those that came into this House, government ministers, because they were available on a Friday. Whips of both parties. I'm not pretending that. And they were there to defy the very principle that ours is an open system of government and that we are all accountable for the way in which we carry and use public money. What we were comforted with was the thought that we had a system behind the sight of others, and that our integrity was reinforced by the fact that it was authorised. They've swept that aside. I think every one of us here recognises it, and as I said, a process is underway. We look forward to Sir Christopher's review. We'll bear it heavily, perhaps, but it is right that the people should have the response that they wanted, that this is no longer in our hands. This is not about the Prime Minister outbidding the leader of the opposition. This should not be about star chambers. Star chamber, a word used by the Prime Minister, put fear into this country for 100 years, that the King should appoint the judges in a little courtroom down there, that the King should charge them, and strangely, his chosen judges should find them guilty, and the King then would say the verdict is right. That is what we've slipped into in our crisis. It denigrates our tradition of liberty. It is contrary to our sense of process and fair trial. Now, may I just finish whilst the theme is within my mind? This is what we've reduced ourselves to accept that, when we can do it better. But not us now. I think our time is past. This is a house dead on its feet. And this is a house that needs the renewal and the authority that in our tradition and in our purpose justifies this being a cradle of democracy and this being that little chamber that once was an example to the world. And that is the restoration that we can seek, and we can seek it through the people. This House has no time. Whatever initiative announced, whatever programme we bring forward, we're talking about a summer recess, we're talking about a Queen's speech, but we all know well that the parties were working on their manifestos. That's really what it's about. To try and present, perhaps some have in the hope that something turns up, but the mind of the public knows that we are busted flush. And I think, really in truth, we know that. There should be an election.
Russell Brown. Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I say it's a pleasure to speak after the honourable gentleman, the member for Aldridge Brownhills. And can I say that he speaks with great sincerity, but can I say that, you know, he and I are coming from this opposite sides. I come from a background of where if something has gone wrong, then I believe the duty lies with the individual or the individuals who've got it wrong to make a start to put things right, to mend it. And he's saying from a sedentary position that we have, and yes, I think we have. What we put in place in terms of the whole allowances fiasco is we've put interim measures in there. We will have an independent review will come to us with views. And I sincerely hope that the whole House would get behind that 100% and accept what is being said. And yes, by all means.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. But one of the problems is that in the cases of some of the MPs who have abused the allowances system, who are standing down, in those areas, frankly, people will not have any representation. And it's not realistic to call umpteen by-elections, which frankly need to happen, because in those seats, people will not accept people simply standing down, getting a salary for another potentially 9 months and a payoff. Those people should go now. But the only way sensibly to do that, I'm afraid, is to dissolve this House and call elections so that we can actually get rid of those people who have abused the system in the ways that we've seen over the last few weeks.
Thanks very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I accept to a certain extent what the gentleman is saying, but I actually go back to the Honourable Member for Moray, when he opened this debate, because there was a clear indication there that what people at this current time are fixated upon, and justifiably so, are the allowances, the expenditure that falls into the hands of elected members, the way that some people have abused it. And let me put it on record, Mr Deputy Speaker, I have committed things to writing in the past on allowances. I have said things. In the last couple of months, I have voted in such a way. Never in my wildest imagination did I ever recognise what was going on. Never. And I defy anyone to stand up and say, well, I knew that was happening. Because I don't think the majority of this household honestly did. And so I say to the honourable gentleman, what he's saying makes sense. But what I fear,
And I don't fear personally for myself, because there was life before this House. There will be life after this House. But we will sweep away far too many good and decent people. So we have a judgment to make. Do we tolerate those that may have abused the system for another few months? Or do we run the risk of sweeping away honest, decent people who deserve to be back here to build on the strengths that we have actually put in place? Can I quote a few words? To serve our country, that is all we ask. These, I believe, Mr. Deputy Speaker, were the words used by the late John Smith in a speech the evening before he tragically passed away some 15 years ago. It would do well on occasions for members, and I include myself, to remember why we are here. We are here to represent people. We are not here to save our own political skins or our own political necks. We are here to do a job, and I do fear that the current hostility out there to each and every one of us, and I was out during the European election campaign, I witnessed that. I witnessed people who would normally be supporters of my party on polling day saying no, they were not coming out. This was their chance to protest. But we all saw what happened last Thursday. And what would dissolution mean? It would mean an election. And what is an election about? It's about policies and it's about manifestos. So we would be asking people to go out to vote angry, not knowing really what any party was proposing. There's some, I suspect, would think it's time for change. We've heard that often enough. It was time for change back in 1997, I have to say, to this House. But my party, at that time, when saying yes, there was need for change in this country, brought forward a manifesto, brought forward pledges about a national minimum wage, about devolved government, about New Deal, cutting class sizes, NHS investment. It was something for people to recognise and get behind if they saw fit to see that change. And I would say to those who have led this debate today that 2 years ago they said it was time. And again they were looking for that change. Now I would say to them that I don't honestly believe that they expected to be where they were after that election. A minority administration, because they had a manifesto or a number of pledges, whatever. So it's important, if people lay out their stall, that they stick by that. The pledge to introduce a local income tax failed. The Scottish Futures Trust, up till now at least it has failed. Never built a brick. Failing in education in terms of class sizes, probationary teachers, student debt, by all means.
The honourable gentleman will be aware that the Scottish governing party has a membership of 47 MSPs, but yet managed to pass its budget with a majority of over 120.
Yes, undoubtedly, I have to say to the honourable gentleman, there was significant wheeling and dealing going on to get there, you know, and that's politics. That's politics. It's grown-up politics, I have to say to it. But, you know, that is fundamentally different to pledges and commitments to the people. Police numbers, failing on that, prison overcrowding, support for first-time buyers. I'm only disappointed, I have to say, Mr Deputy Speaker, that I couldn't get a hold of the election leaflet to bring it and say, you know, could do better, could do significantly better. So it's about saying to the people, when this Parliament closes its doors, I won't take the honourable gentleman because I've only got 2 or 3 minutes here. I would say to him that when it comes to an election time, the people deserve manifestos laid before them. No, I'm not taking any more interventions. They deserve policies and manifestos laid before them. Let me turn quickly, before I finish, Mr Deputy Speaker, because reference has been made to 1979. And my late and good comrade, Bob Cryer, he said in his contribution at 8:20 p.m. on the 28th of March 1979, "It is characteristic of the Tories. They are not acting from principle. Their principle is opportunism. As the Prime Minister pointed out, the SNP put down a motion and the Tories went into action to follow it up. The Tories did not produce their motion for any reasons that they could adduce about the state of the nation or the economy." He further says, "The opposition often betray a duality of standards," and he goes on to talk about the then chairman of the Conservative Party, who could be receiving £30,000 per year from Pirelli, a company which is apparently overcharging the post office by £9 million a year. And he talks about individual responsibility. There is an individual responsibility on everyone in this House. And we have a duty, I believe, to then very quickly, he's bigger than me.
Detected some dissatisfaction on his part with things that the Scottish Nationalist Party had said in relation to what he claims they'd then done. Can he then explain how it was that last week the Scottish Nationalists were supported so strongly by the Scottish people?
Well, let me say to him, above the guffawing that's going on, I expected a honeymoon period. I've got to say, what the SNP have had is more than a fair wind. It's gone beyond a honeymoon period. It's been a love-in that John Lennon and Yoko Ono would have been brilliant at. I want to come to, well, my honourable friend from a sedentary position says they're not doing anything. They complain and whinge. They complain about half a billion pound cut in a budget. In actual fact, what they're getting, and people need to know, is £700 million extra this coming year. No, I'm not, because I want to finish, and I want to pay a compliment, despite all of this. I want to pay a compliment to the right honourable gentleman, the member from Richmond. And I want to share a secret with him and those in the House, because no one else is going to really know about this. Let me say to him that at the time his party was selecting their last leader, that I was in a room probably with about 15 other people who were all members of the Conservative Association. I didn't know at the time, I have to say. And I said that the best individual to lead their party was the right honourable gentleman. And I said at that time, I said that he will be the next Conservative Prime Minister. I think his time came early previously, because as far as I'm concerned, he stands head and shoulders above anyone else in his benches. It may upset the right honourable gentleman, the member for Whitney, but I'll advance your career. I sincerely hope that's not the kiss of death for him. But in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me say I thought that we might this evening have been able to get an answer from the SNP, because the question was asked twice over about what would they prefer to see after the next election. Would they prefer to see a return of a Labour government to this House, a Tory government, or what is their view? We don't get an answer. We don't get an answer because I don't think that...
Can I get an answer for the honourable gentleman that I failed to get from the member for Stirling? Would the honourable gentleman have preferred during the 80s an independent Scotland with a Labour government, or 18 years of a Tory government from Westminster? Answer.
Let's just admitted it. Let me say it slowly so that the honourable gentleman can understand. We are a party of the Union. We do not believe in independence. I would much have preferred to have seen, as my honourable friend, the member from Cannock Chase said, a different form of words. That they could have used today's Opposition Day debate in a much more constructive manner, because they have failed, although the people of Scotland have not recognised it as yet. But they will do. Time will catch up with them. Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope that colleagues on this side of the House will be voting in opposition to the motion laid before us today.
Elvin Fluid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've had quite a wide-ranging debate.
And it started with a very fine speech by my honourable friend Murray, and he referred to the fact that the public out there are demanding that we actually go to the people now and ask for a fresh mandate. I believe he's right. I believe that this whole idea of the BNP wasn't an aberration. It's not going to go away unless we tackle it head on. One of the reasons why that evil has come into politics, I believe, is that we are discredited as an institution. And that, I think, is quite obvious. It would have been better if the Prime Minister had been here for this debate, because many of the points raised in this debate were raised in the statement that he made earlier on, with which I have to say I agreed almost entirely. The timing and the re-announcements perhaps weren't good, but generally what he said was good and I believe worthy. My honourable friend also referred to the fact that this is not a motion of confidence, not meant to be, and is not. And he also referred to the various surveys and opinion polls we've had recently, where a vast majority of the public have come out in favour of an immediate election. And it's not one, it's not two, it's several polls, and often by a very large margin indeed. No doubt at leisure we'll be able to read the exact percentages. But he said, and he's right, that we need to grasp the nettle. We must sort this out. The expenses scandal has been sorted out in part, but we need to accept the Kelly Commission, good, bad or indifferent. We need to accept it all. We need to accept it fully, because we cannot cherry-pick on that, otherwise we'll be back in the same position again. He put to rest the whole idea of having an election during an economic crisis, referring, as he did, to India, the USA, Canada and other places as well. The whole idea, actually, that we cannot have an election is preposterous, as was very well underlined by other speakers, including the Right Honourable Gentleman for Richmond. The Right Honourable Gentleman for Neath, out of practice on the front bench, I have to say, and picked up a speech which was not worthy of him, frankly. He hadn't written that speech because it was drivel. He wouldn't have written that speech. And I say that because I know he's an intelligent man. But anyway, as the Honourable Gentleman for Cannock said, we're all playing the game, so he says, but he played the game earlier on, and with respect to him, not very well. But that wasn't his fault. That was the fault of the speechwriter who should... Oh, it was? Oh, I beg your pardon. Well, I'm awfully sorry, but he is out of practice after all, and I do welcome him back. Well, I've very limited time now, I have to say. I'm sorry. But one thing he did say, was that he was conceding defeat at the next election, because the calamity that would follow if this went to a vote and the vote was won. And he referred to lancing the boil. Well, waiting for 9 months to lance a boil is not medically a good idea. Boils need to be lanced fairly quickly. Well, I mean, it would only lead to septicemia, I know that. And I'm actually not a doctor, but the point was, there was a bit of knockabout, I accept. But at the end of the day, I think he needs a little bit of practice. I say, welcome him back. He's a worthy member on the front bench, but he was skewered once or twice from my left with some pretty sharp interventions, some pretty accurate darts, I thought. The Right Honourable Gentleman for Richmond, in an erudite speech, which we always expect of him, referred to the tasks ahead. He referred to the National Democratic Renewal Council, that wonderful institution reflective of all of us in here, peopled by ministers behind closed doors. No doubt it will have a great deal of credence and legitimacy when it comes together. He said, I think quite right, that the majority of people now believe an election is necessary. He referred to the polls, and he said that dissolution really is in the public interest, and he was quite right to say that. He referred to the Labour support being the lowest since the 18th century, and he referred to the famous time when the Prime Minister bottled the election, and he now doesn't want an election because there might be chaos. The reference to Ceausescu was quite interesting. That I think was meant to be in jest, but actually there's some rather interesting background to it as well. No doubt the new National Democratic Renewal Council will be quoted at length on the Supreme Leader page of Private Eye. But it does remind one of some lines written by Brecht, who we all read regularly, no doubt, after the anti-government riots in East Berlin in '53. He says, "After the uprising of the 17th of June, the Secretary of the Writers' Union had leaflets distributed in the Stalinei, stating that the people had forfeited the confidence of the government and could win it back only by redoubled efforts. Would it not be easier, asked Brecht, in that case for government to dissolve the people and elect another?" And that does make one think about the situation in general. But the Right Honourable Gentleman went on to refer to the huge democracies of India, the USA, having elections in an orderly manner, no whiff of chaos there. But apparently the Prime Minister believes it's impossible to have an election here because it would be chaotic. That, I think, is undermining, I think, the credence and the intelligence of the British people. I have no time, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. If the gentleman had remained for the rest of the debate, I probably would. Anyway, he referred in a very humorous manner to Cardinal Wolsey, the reference to Lord Mandelson, and so on. That was Archbishop Mandelson. That was a tour de force, hugely amusing and very effective. I turn to the Honourable Gentleman for Cannock Chase, and unusually, for a gentleman who speaks very, very well on these subjects, I don't think he got the matter right with respect to him. He referred to this motion being dishonest and dangerous. It's not dishonest and it's not dangerous. It's called for by the people out there, and we believe that we are actually responding to what the people wanted. He said that we play the game. Yes, we do play the game. But during his speech, he said governments call elections when they think they can win them. Well, that's playing the game, is it not? And that's the worst form of game, in my view. The Honourable Gentleman for Somerton, and he said actually as well, he missed the point that this motion here is unprecedented. There's never been a motion of this kind before Parliament before. Oppositions have put motions of no confidence and so on. This is a dissolution motion by Parliament and of Parliament, and it's quite different from anything previously. So, unusually, I find myself completely at variance with his normally very informed views. The Honourable Gentleman for Somerton and Frome, in a very thoughtful speech, mentioned two main reasons why he supported this motion tonight. That Parliament was compromised, that we've lost respect, and that we really should go back to the people and seek a mandate. He said the collapse of confidence in government and in the Prime Minister, and he said that the economic difficulties made it even more prescient and more important for us to go to the country. He said that if there were a timetable forthcoming for the work to be completed and an announcement as to a date of an election, that might be better. But he referred to the response of the government to this crisis of confidence. There is a crisis of confidence. There is no doubt that the Prime Minister is failing in leadership. The Honourable Lady for Stirling referred to a poll which supported keeping the Prime Minister in place. A poll of fewer than 100 people, and perhaps not the most persuasive evidence in support. Not really a poll, actually, either, but never mind. And she also said, let slip during her speech, that a general election would do for us all. That may be, but it's not a reason why not to go to the country, actually. I'm afraid it was rather a self-serving speech and led by continuous attacks for the Scottish National Party and very little else, I'm afraid to say. The Honourable Gentleman for Aldridge Brownhills made a very thoughtful contribution, as he always does, referring to history, 1832, Long March, the fear of revolution, 1865, and so on. He said that if there were a poll, maybe half the House would go, half would remain. That is in itself renewal, and that's absolutely right. I don't think he or anybody else in this place should fear going to the people and having their voice heard and reacting accordingly. It was a very good speech. He referred to the current situation being a busted flush, frankly, that is exactly what is happening at the moment, because the people out there believe that this institution is badly damaged. As usual, his logic was unanswerable, and the oratory, and I call it that, commanded absolute silence in the chamber, and that silence, I think, was eloquent. From the honourable gentleman for Dumfries and Galloway, finally, we had a walk around the trees and the woods, and we had some insults to the Scottish National Party. But, he came up with several answers to several questions. One question he could not answer was that if the Scottish Government, God help them, are so bad, why are they running away with the polls in Scotland? Why are they...
Order. If the honourable member knows to face the House, if only for the Hansard writers.
Brief point in a rather theatrical manner. The question that he couldn't answer was if the Scottish Government are letting the Scots people down, why did they do so fantastically well last weekend? And in every opinion poll, and consistently, that graph is just going up and through the roof. So there we have it. We have a rather speech that didn't take us very far. Can I finish my few remarks by saying this? It's been a good debate. It's been a debate that's been worth having. It is not a confidence motion, but it's about the credibility of Parliament. Many of us in many parties, and I'm sure in the heart of hearts of many people opposite, believe that we do have, to use the words, a busted flush. If we went to the country, there would be a renewal. All the procedures are in place. We're waiting for Kelly. There have been pro tem other procedures put in. So there's nothing to prevent us from going and having an election in the same way as those other countries have, only very recently indeed. I urge honourable members to consider the debate, to think carefully about what they're doing this evening. And I would urge honourable members on the opposite side to join those of us who are democratically concerned about the future of this place, and join us in the lobbies later on.
Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I apologise to the House that it's me replying to the debate, but I had been asked... I'd been asked to do this before I was moved to the Foreign Office, so this is a sort of final appearance as the Deputy Leader of the House. Madam Deputy Speaker, we had some interesting speeches this afternoon. We had some speeches which I think were fundamentally misleading. I think it's a shame that the honourable member who... Oh, no, the honourable member Murray has been able to get back into the chamber now. I disagreed with virtually every word that he said, as I'm sure he will expect. We had, I think, contrary to the honourable member for Mary Honest Nant Conwy, who was trying to patronise the Secretary of State for Wales, which is his favourite tactic when he's rattled. I thought that my right honourable friend made a very good argument, which I shall hope to return to. We then had important contributions from my honourable friend, the member from Cannock Chase, and my honourable friend, the member for Stirling, who made some important points about the Scottish nationalist record, which I think need to be heard. We also, of course, heard from the honourable friend for Somerton of Frome, whom I sort of like to think of as an honourable friend these days. When he was lying on top of me the other day, or I was lying on top of him, I can't remember, it was on the rugby pitch at Twickenham, he impressed upon me... He impressed upon me the need for radical reform of Parliament, and as he knows, I have always agreed with him on these matters. We also heard from the honourable member for Aldridge Brownhills, and the honourable member for Aldridge Brownhills always speaks from the heart. He always speaks with minimal notes, and he always speaks with great conviction. I don't happen to agree with the conclusions that he came to, and as he knows, I often disagree with the conclusions that he comes to, but I nonetheless share with him the respect for this House and the need for and the importance of us being able to reinforce its value into the future, being able to restore the reputation in which it is held. He referred to several changes in the Constitution that were brought about in the 19th century. One of the most important ones, as far as the Ronda was concerned, was when the franchise was extended to minors, and from that day forward they've had Labour representation. And there are further reforms that we need to make. And Madam Deputy Speaker, the most important thing I think that we need to consider when we're considering whether or not we should dissolve Parliament is there anything that we need to do urgently? And I believe that there are two very important things that we need to do urgently. But I realise I've forgotten the Right Honourable Member for Richmond and his highly illuminating speech. He did, however, mislead us on, inadvertently, I'm sure, on one fact. He said that he thought that one day the Business Secretary Lord Mandelson might one day... Well, he said he was going to be an archbishop, and from my former career, I'm used to calling archbishops my lord. But I'm sure that he wouldn't suffice with an archbishopric. After all, archbishops can be fallible. The most important thing is that there are significant things that we need to do as a government. I believe, as all honourable members have said today, we need to take very seriously the message that the electorate sent us last week. Not only a message to my political party, but to all the political parties represented in this chamber. There was a significant fall in turnout in many areas. There was a vote for the far right in many areas. In my own constituency, the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats came in after the British National Party. There are very important issues that we need to bear in mind here. And I believe that there are important reforms that we need to do about the way that we do politics, and we need to do these, as the Honourable Member for Somerton and Frome said, urgently, very urgently. First, we need to have an independent parliamentary standards authority because it is important that we should not set our own pay and rations. Our pay, our allowances, our pensions should be set, monitored, audited and administered completely independently of this House. That's one of the major things that has brought this place into disrepute. Nobody should be able to enrich themselves by virtue of being a member of this House or by virtue of the allowances that they're able to claim. Nobody should be prevented equally from being a member of this House because they don't have an independent fortune. We should be able to have anybody able to represent a constituency in this country regardless of their background. And I note that the Honourable Member for Somerton and Frome wants a swift timetable. There will be a swift timetable to bring this forward. We need to see this as swiftly as possible, and I think that means that it would be ludicrous and inappropriate for us to have a general election now. In addition, I think we need to make sure that the process of reassessment of all the claims that honourable members have made back to the year 2004, and if necessary, repayment, can be done swiftly. That has to be done, surely, before any general election. So again, a matter that we need to address swiftly. And I believe that we need to look very seriously at the issues that my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, raised this afternoon in terms of reform of the House of Commons. I will in just one moment. In terms of its committees, we all recognise the value of the select committee system, which has been around in its changing form for the last 25-30 years, but we need to go a step further in making sure that those committees have real power and ability to transform the politics of this country. And I believe that the changes that my right honourable friend referred to this afternoon would help in that. Likewise, we need to look at the issue of timetabling, and we need to look at the way we conduct our business. All of these things are matters that we need to look at urgently if we're to make sure that this House, which has through the centuries been respected around the countries, returns to that key position. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Most grateful to the honourable gentleman. I have to say, in reference to his earlier reference to Twickenham, I seem to remember being hurled rather forcibly by a second row forward at the honourable gentleman rather than simply collapsing on top of him. But, and that's not the point. He is now articulating a raft of reforms that some people on all sides of this chamber have been advocating year after year after year, and the front bench, the Treasury front bench, has refused to accept them. So why should we now believe that there is a realistic timetable to introduce these matters as a matter of urgency? And if there is such a timetable, can he tell us precisely what it is?
Well, some of the measures he knows perfectly well haven't been around forever and a day. Some of them have, and he knows perfectly well that I've supported them. I've often been going through the lobbies on many of these issues with him. And one of the other issues, of course, relates to House of Lords reform. I believe that it is wrong that people choose to tell people in this country how to live their lives and aren't prepared to put themselves up for election, which is why I believe in reform of the second chamber. But on the one issue where I think there is the most dramatic urgency is in relation to the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority. This is not something that has arisen until recently, and I think that it is something that we do now need to proceed as fast as we can. It will be for my right honourable friend, the Leader of the House, to inform him when that's going to happen. But as I understand, several honourable members have been in cross-party talks this afternoon about some of these measures, and I hope that we will be able to move them forward as fast as possible. But I would say to him that there's one second area where it is vital that we continue urgent work, and that is in relation to the recession. A recession which has uniquely hit the whole of the world to a very profound degree. And I have to say that when I was going out knocking on doors in my constituency during the elections last week, I had people constantly raising issues in relation to their own family income, in relation to their savings, in relation to their jobs and their future prosperity. These are the issues which I think they would have been expecting this House to be debating in substantial measure this afternoon. Because the truth is, it was this government that acted to shore up the banking system, not so as to protect bankers, but to make sure that individuals' deposits were protected. Otherwise, people would have lost all their savings. This is the government that has been putting in support for businesses who are now able to defer their taxes at an important time in the economic cycle. We're the government who has introduced additional support for mortgage interest, reducing it when people are unemployed, so that instead of it only kicking in up to £100,000 mortgages, it goes in up to £200,000 mortgages, and so that it's not just after 39 weeks, it's after 13 weeks. And I have to say that though the Right Honourable Member for Richmond didn't mention any of these issues because he doesn't seem to have any interest in the situation in relation to the economy, or for that matter, like his Right Honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, no time to mention any matters of substance, these are the kinds of issues that are facing our constituents and we need to address. And so I say, no, now is not the time. And I'm not going to give way if the honourable gentleman doesn't mind, because I have very little time. But I do want to address some of the issues that have been raised by the nationalists, because I say to the nationalists, they pretend so much in political life, and yet we all know the truth that lies behind. Because what is the truth here? They don't expect to form a government if there's a general election. They're not intending to put up candidates across every seat in England and Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland. They have no intention to form a government of their own. What they want to do is get rid of this government to put that lot in here. And they should be honest with the House about it. Yes, absolutely. The honourable gentleman and his friends should look carefully at where they're getting the cheers from. And we know that this is the truth because they've got record on this, haven't we? Just look at 1979, exactly the same that they did then. Look at 1993 when they propped up a discredited government. The truth is that the nationalists are so obsessed with independence that that is the only thing that they will ever see. Of course, the leader of their party, the leader in Scotland, could perfectly well today have been in Scotland voting on reform of the rape law. Instead, he's decided to sit in here and smirk like a Cheshire cat so that he gets on the television behind the leader of Plaid, Cymru. Where were they when it came to the minimum wage? None of them even bothered to turn up, and yet they try to pretend that they believe in things.
Order, order, order. Order. The House must come to order. This debate is coming to an end, and members who've been here throughout this debate wish to hear the Minister's reply. There are far too many private conversations going on. Chris Bryant.
Oh, what's the truth of the matter? That they always vote with the Tories.
Order. Order. Chris Bryant.
So what's the truth of the matter? They always vote with the Tories. And who was the latest member to come into the House? I'm glad to see he's sitting there. The honourable member for Glasgow East. His first 4 votes. Which division lobby did he go through? Not the division lobby with the Labour Party, but the division lobby with the Conservatives. No wonder, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Scottish Conservative Conference programme this year this year said, for the first time in more than a decade, Conservative policies are being enacted. And it is here in Scotland. Yes, it's Conservative policies being enacted by the Scottish Nationalist Party. So we know that the Nationalists like to ride in on the Conservatives' coattails, but it's the Conservatives who like to ride in on their coattails as well. Not table their own motion, but come running along, Johnny come lately after this little shower. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I warn the Conservatives about the Nationalists, because the Nationalists don't share the same principles in some areas. They want to cut defence jobs in Scotland and in Wales. They want to see the end of Trident in Faslane. They don't support St Athan and the new Defence Training Academy in Wales, which would mean thousands of jobs in South Wales, including for people in my constituency. What are the Nationalists in my constituency doing about Armed Forces Day? Oh yes, they're saying it's just a gimmick and they're not prepared to defend our armed forces. And on the economy, we know oh yes, I'm about to come to the honourable member. He can keep calm. And so, what were his views? The honourable gentleman, along with all the Nationalists, they proclaimed the Arc of Prosperity, didn't they? The great Arc of Prosperity, which was to extend across the smaller countries, Ireland, Iceland, Latvia. And what was it he said? Small country success is everywhere. Iceland has a GDP per capita some £7,000 above Wales. But the truth is now, isn't it, that in Iceland inflation is running at 18%. Its economy has shrunk by 10%. So we know that the Nationalist policy on the economy is absolutely nowhere. They have no suggestions. They have no way of making sure that this country returns to strength. And so, Madam...
Point of order.
I beg the question be now put.
Mr Hosey.
The question be now put.
The question is that the question be now put. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. And the contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. And the contrary no. No. Division. Clear the lobby. The question is, as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. And the contrary no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Pete Wishart and Adam Price. Tellers for the noes, Mark Tommy and Dawn Butler. the doors. Order. Would the Sergeant please investigate the delay in the eye lobby?